Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a space where science is allowed to slow down, where questions can linger as long as they need to, and where wonder is given room to breathe. Tonight, we're going to drift gently into a question that feels at once impossible and yet strangely familiar. What if the frost never melted? What if the glaciers never loosened their grip on the world, and the Earth remained covered in the endless stillness of ice? Before we wander any further, I'd like to pause with you for a moment. Where are you as you listen tonight? Perhaps you are close to the mountains, where snow clings stubbornly to high peaks even in summer. Or perhaps you are far away, in a place where frost is only a distant memory, touched once or twice in a lifetime. Wherever you are, I wonder, can you recall the feeling of silence that snow carries? That hush in the air, muffling footsteps, swallowing distance, making the familiar seem older, slower, almost timeless. Imagine that silence, not for a night, not for a season, but stretched across all of Earth. The entire planet, dreamlike, paused in winter's hand. Glaciers are more than frozen water. They are storytellers. Each layer of snow pressed down, hardened, and buried holds within it the dust of deserts, the ash of volcanoes, even tiny whispers of ocean salt carried through the air. To the eye, it is simply ice. To the mind, it is memory. Scientists call it stratigraphy, the stacking of time in frozen sheets, each one a thin diary of centuries long gone. And yet, how does it feel to think of Earth itself as a being that remembers? Is it possible that the frost is nothing less than the handwriting of the planet, preserved in crystalline silence? If the frost never melted, maybe those pages of memory would never be erased. Maybe we would live in a planet-sized archive, a museum of deep time beneath our feet. But what kind of world would stretch above that archive? Imagine oceans locked under glassy lids of ice, their waves muted, their tides turned inward. Beneath them, hydrothermal vents would still exhale warmth into the darkness, life gathering in strange pockets of refuge. Even in the stillness, the Earth would not be truly still. The continents would still creep forward with tectonic patience, colliding, breaking, subducting into the mantle. Mountains would still rise beneath the frost, unseen. Volcanoes would still burn against frozen weight. The machinery of geology never sleeps, even when the surface seems lifeless. Could it be that a perpetual ice age is not the end of activity, but only the slowing of its song into frequencies too patient for us to hear? And what of us? What would it mean to grow up in a world where spring never arrives? We, sunlit creatures shaped by warmth and the rhythms of thaw, would know ourselves differently. Maybe our myths would never speak of summer. Maybe our stories would be carried only by firelight against the walls of ice shelters, where warmth itself would be sacred beyond measure. The crackle of flame might replace the birdsong of spring. Children might grow up tracing their ancestry not through harvests, but through the careful keeping of sparks, passed down through generations. Could it be that humanity itself would have been carved into sharper stone by endless frost, our memory of warmth existing only as rumor, as dream? The science tells us that ice can preserve astonishing detail, traces of ancient pollen, fragments of DNA, even tiny bubbles of air containing a record of atmospheres breathed by creatures long vanished. But science tells us something else as well. That entropy always waits. Even in the cold, decay works slowly, invisibly, patient as the stars. What if the frost never melted, but entropy still gathered, soft and unending? Perhaps the great irony of a frozen Earth is that it would look eternal, but beneath, silence would still be busy undoing history, taking memory apart molecule by molecule. Not lost quickly, but lost in whispers over millions of years. Is that more comforting or more haunting? We are used to thinking of time as a river that flows, carrying us away. But under endless frost, time would be different. Instead of rushing forward, it might feel like it circles in place, looping, folding back on itself. The repetition of snow upon snow, dust upon dust, echo upon echo, would make it hard to know what year we live in at all. Perhaps we would begin to think less about progress, less about the future, and more about survival in the eternal present. Is it possible that such a life would teach us something about who we really are, stripped of growth, stripped of seasons, left only with continuity? And still, as we imagine this world sealed in frost, a question lingers like breath in frozen air. What does the planet remember that we do not? Could there have been stories written in the ice that vanished when glaciers retreated? Could whole civilizations, our experiments, our beginnings, have already been buried in snow, rising and erasing before our histories even began? Maybe the frost remembers. Maybe the ice holds voices that are older than language. The thought is quiet, but persistent. What if the frost never melted? What if the ice itself had always been our sky, our land, our measure? Would we be able to recognize ourselves? Or would time, identity, even memory, freeze into something unrecognizable? We do not know. We may never know. But even in our ignorance, the question lingers with the softness of snow drifting down, moment by moment, layer by layer, pressing itself into the story of Earth. And yet, if an endless winter can hold such secrets, then what of the silence that follows it? Silence is not just absence. It is its own kind of presence. In a world held under perpetual snow, sound itself becomes strange. The crunch of footsteps dissolves almost as soon as it is made, swallowed by the softness of frost. Voices travel only a little way before fading, muted as though the air itself has grown heavy. Snow absorbs sound, not allowing it to echo, not allowing it to linger. And so, across vast frozen plains, there would be stillness like no other. A stillness deep enough to feel like a geological force. Imagine standing on such a plain. White stretches endlessly in every direction, the horizon blurred into sky. The air carries no birdsong, no ripple of water, no rustling of leaves. Even the wind, when it comes, hisses rather than roars, as though it too has learned to soften its voice. It is in this hush that Earth itself seems to breathe differently. Silence here is not emptiness. It is archive. Every muffled snowfall is another page pressed into the great book of the planet's memory. Scientists who study ancient snow know that silence is traceable. Ice cores, drilled from kilometers deep, reveal that quiet does not mean nothing happened. It means the record is hidden in stillness. Beneath frozen layers lie the ashes of old volcanoes, faint signatures of cosmic dust drifting down from the stars, residues of ancient atmospheres trapped in bubbles so small they can only be seen through magnifying glass and light. That is the paradox of silence. It feels like loss, but in truth, it keeps more secrets than noise ever could. And what would silence do to us, should it persist across entire lifetimes? Humans are creatures of rhythm, of language, of sound. In a muted world, our imaginations would lean harder into inward landscapes. Without the chatter of rivers, without the chorus of migrating birds, perhaps thought itself would grow slower, firmer, and more deliberate. We might measure time not by clocks or seasons, but by the weight of silence stretching between our words. Could it be that in such a world, we would come to treat each spoken phrase as sacred, every whisper as fossil-like, preserved, fragile, and rare? Snow's silence is not merely acoustic but emotional. Those who have walked through it know the strange sensation it gives. As if you are watched, as if the world holds its breath around you. Maybe in an earth of endless frost, we would feel this not for an afternoon, but forever. Perhaps whole cultures would rise around the worship of stillness, offering rituals not with music, but with quiet, with long pauses, with silence itself as prayer. Geologists sometimes call sediment a diary of the earth. But silence, too, is a diary, written not in sound but in absence. Between tectonic shifts, between storms, there are long spaces of apparent nothing. Yet these pauses shape the rhythm of deep time as surely as catastrophic events. The Earth does not only remember through explosions and extinctions, it also remembers through the hush that follows them. Could it be that silence itself is one of the planet's oldest languages? In such frozen quiet, entropy would feel different. Instead of announcing itself in eruptions of collapse, it would slip softly into things. Wooden shelters would not fall with sudden crashes but sag slowly under frost. Bones left upon the snow would not echo as they cracked but sink gradually, noiselessly, into the drift. Even fossils would form in softer ways, minerals replacing structure with steady patience, invisible, unhurried. Loss in such a world would never be loud. It would always be a quiet undoing. Is it possible, then, that silence is not frightening but instructive? Perhaps the stillness of an endless ice age reveals to us that noise is temporary, that sound is merely punctuation in the greater text of quiet. Without silence, there is no room for memory to press itself into history. Without silence, there is no atmosphere for reflection. Maybe the deepest truth of perpetual frost is not its cold, but its quiet. And yet, if silence can become a climate all its own, heavy enough to reshape us, then what does it mean for the landscapes themselves? What stories do glaciers tell? Not through voice but through the scars they carve, the stones they drag, the valleys they leave behind. Their silence leads us not only to land but to sky, for above this frozen world, the atmosphere itself would change, drawn into suspension like a breath held too long. When frost becomes permanent, it does not only blanket the ground, it reshapes the air. The very chemistry of the sky becomes an archive. Think for a moment of air the way we rarely do, as something ancient, something with memory. Each breath you take contains atoms that once flowed in the lungs of mammoths, that once drifted above primeval seas. Invisible to us, but not absent. Within the world of endless ice, that air would be slowed, thickened, altered, written upon by the trappings of cold. Carbon, usually restless, would be captured and held down, locked in frozen oceans, sealed inside permafrost. The great respiration of the planet, the inhale and exhale of carbon exchange, would feel stilled, as though Earth itself had paused between breaths. Not because the world has stopped, but because its lungs are trapped in winter. Yet even stillness has its fossils. Scientists call them isotope trails, delicate variations in atoms that tell us what the air was made of, century by century, layer by layer. In bubbles trapped within ice, we find records of vanished climates, oxygen ratios that whisper of different skies, carbon concentrations that reveal how much of the atmosphere lived or died across time. What does it mean to think of air as a kind of fossil? It has no bones, no shell, no visible body. And yet here it is, preserved, waiting, telling stories no one was alive to hear. Could it be that atmosphere itself is the most fragile diary the planet has ever kept? An Earth in suspension would carry strange echoes. With less carbon wandering the air, skies might sharpen into hard clarity, stars burning with unusual brightness across the night horizon. Sunlight would scatter differently, washed pale across ice fields, shadows blue, days stretching longer in their thin stillness. Perhaps even the chemistry of snowfall would change, sheets of white flavored with tiny differences in trapped gases. Imagine standing under such a sky, knowing that what falls around you is not just water, but molecules that carry the fingerprint of ages, molecules that will be buried for millennia. We live now in a world of movement, carbon cycling through forests, oceans inhaling and exhaling, storms mixing air across hemispheres. But in a planet held still by ice, circulation would be weaker, slower, like a heart beating too faintly to circulate warmth. Winds would not vanish, but would carry dust in long, languid drifts, painting stripes across the glaciers. Air would stop being a restless traveler and become instead a hesitant archivist. Movement would preserve memory, but hold it in suspension, half asleep. And perhaps that is what frozen air teaches us, that time itself can be paused, not stopped completely but slowed to a crawl. Gases trapped within ice are not destroyed. They are simply waiting. Waiting for us millions of years later, to puncture the glacier with drills, to listen to the breath of an atmosphere that slept for half an epoch. What if, one day, some future beings, human or otherwise, look back at the layers we are leaving now? What if within our thin, polluted sky, there are signatures that will one day be studied like a warning, or perhaps like a fable? Maybe they will see what we cannot. That in our age, the air rushed too quickly, carbon thickened too fast, a fever rising in the lungs of Earth before the long cold could quiet it again. Maybe they will trace us in isotopes the way we trace volcanoes or asteroids. Not because they know our language, but because air is a kind of speech that cannot lie. There is something soothing but unsettling about this thought, that the air around you, the very breath you draw, is also history, also artifact. Every exhale joins the archive. Every inhale connects you to events older than memory. Atmosphere in ice is atmosphere in suspension. Remembrance caught in bubbles. Silence lifted from the lungs of the planet and held perfectly still against time's usual tide of erosion and loss. And yet, if the sky itself can be frozen into memory, if air can become a fossil, then what of the oceans breathing beneath the lid of ice? Beneath the frozen surface, water never truly stops moving. Even under a shell of silence, the seas continue their slow, patient work. Drifting currents carry salt, minerals, and fragments of life through darkness, as though the ocean still breathes in secret, a heartbeat muffled but unbroken. Picture the world's oceans sealed under ice that never thaws. To look at their surface is to see only stillness, an endless plain, pale and hard, unchanging. But below that facade, life remains, subdued but not extinguished. Tiny plankton drift in diluted spirals, catching faint glimmers of light that trickle through cracks in the ice. Bacteria huddle around warm plumes of hydrothermal vents, their colonies glowing faintly in a world that is otherwise eternally blue and black. These are laboratories of survival, ecosystems designed not for abundance, but for persistence. Could it be that this is how life has always endured? Quietly, invisibly, hidden away in places untouched by surface chaos? Even in today's world, plankton form the lungs of the ocean, drawing in carbon, releasing oxygen, cycling the breath of the planet. In a frozen Earth, their rhythms would slow to a hushed beat, their populations thin, their communities fragile. But fossils tell us they do not stop. Deep-sea sediments carry the imprint of diatoms, coccolithophores, and spores, each one a quiet pulse etched into the rock. The fossil record whispers that even in ages of great glaciation, the ocean never stopped breathing. Maybe not loudly, maybe not abundantly, but breathing nonetheless. Life persists not because it dominates, but because it refuses to let go. If glaciers above are archives of atmosphere, then oceans below are vaults of memory. Currents carry nutrients downward, where they drift into subduction trenches and are drawn back into earth, folded into stone, erased only to rise again one day as volcanic gases whispering into the atmosphere. Think of it, ocean breath becoming magma, magma becoming air, air becoming snow, snow becoming ice. Could it be that the whole planet breathes this way, through cycles so endless we mistake them for silence? Even entropy behaves differently underwater. On land, with cracks and crumbles, bones bleach under sun and wind. But beneath the ocean's frozen veil, decay becomes slow, careful, almost tender. Organic matter rains downward as marine snow, particles of dust, shells and fragments, a snowfall of memory drifting mile after mile into the abyss. Layer by layer, seabeds become tombs of time, pressing fragments into fossils that will one day tell stories of a frozen age. Could it be that fossils are just the ocean's way of remembering what the ice has forgotten? But perhaps the most haunting image is this: the ocean breathing against the ice above, pressing upward with tides that never break free. The moon still pulls, gravity still guides, but waves cannot rise. Energy that would once have been storms is instead muted, folded back into itself. What happens to a planet where tides still move but cannot be seen? Is it possible that memory itself accumulates there, energy never fully released, pressed into each rise and fall of the invisible sea? We often think of oceans as loud, roaring, filled with currents and life. Yet here, in a frozen earth, they would exist more like lungs breathing in meditation. Not collapsed, not dead, but still deliberate, waiting. And when we look at cores drilled from ancient seabeds, when we find isotopic traces of plankton shells and faint ratios of carbon laid down in times of ice, we discover proof. They were breathing then, and they are breathing now. not because time allowed it, but because silence holds its own pulse. And so, the frozen oceans remind us that breath is not always measured in volume, but in persistence. Even when trapped, even when starved, water and life move patiently, slowly, without demand. Perhaps that is why life survives across deep time. Not because it resists silence, but because it learns to live inside it. And yet, if oceans can keep breathing beneath the weight of endless frost, what of the glaciers themselves? Those blue giants shifting above, carving valleys and sculpting continents as they grind the planet into new shapes? To see a glacier from the surface is to think of stillness, a sheet of ice unmoving. But beneath, within, and through them, there is constant motion. So slow that it escapes our notice, so powerful that it sculpts whole landscapes. Glaciers are not statues. They are rivers of frozen time, flowing toward seas they may never reach, carrying histories pressed within their ice like prayers folded into walls of stone. Inside the glacier's body, light behaves differently. Sunlight enters as white, but the ice absorbs the warmth of reds and yellows, letting only blues remain. Step into a cavern carved by meltwater or time, and you would find yourself inside a world painted in blue, a cathedral of crystal, where shadows look alive. The ceiling drips with the memory of ancient storms. The walls gleam with layers that have held the weight of centuries. Even the air feels heavy, as if each breath carries not just oxygen but the silence of all the winters that came before you. Could it be that glaciers are more than moving ice? Could they be memory itself given form, compressed, luminous, endlessly patient? To walk across them is to walk across archives. Beneath every step lie grains of dust blown in from deserts, relic ash from volcanoes that erupted thousands of years before human eyes ever saw fire, fragments of pollen lifted by ancient winds. Glaciers swallow these things without malice, pressing them down into frozen geology. And when scientists drill into their depths, when they retrieve the cores, they are in truth unscrolling pages of a book that never asked to be written but was written anyway by the persistence of snow and time. And yet glaciers are not only keepers of memory, they are restless architects. The grinding sound of ice upon rock reshapes continents. Where cliffs tumble now, where valleys stretch wide, where stones lie polished and scattered, these are the markings of glaciers passing by. Imagine the scale of that work. An entire mountain ridge worn flat not by catastrophe but by persistence, by the weight of silence pressing downward century after century. We see the result in U-shaped valleys, in fjords filled with sea, in sediments layered into the ocean. The ice remembers, yes, but it also erases, sculpting over the landscapes it once preserved. Maybe, in the deepest sense, glaciers remind us that creation and destruction are not separate, but the same motion seen from different timescales. The shadows they cast are not only literal but emotional. Standing at the base of a glacier, one feels small, as though time itself is leaning forward. The quiet hum is not silence, it is geologic pressure, a frequency too heavy for the ear. Glacial ice presses against stone, the weight of epochs bearing down across continents, grinding everything into new shape. Even when they appear to retreat, glaciers are at work, leaving behind lakes where they rest, moraines where they pause, ridges where they sigh into stillness. Could it be that the glacier is teaching us a subtle truth, that movement need not be fast to be immense, that change can feel invisible even while it transforms the entire face of a planet? But perhaps most haunting of all is the light. Inside an ice tunnel, bathed in blue, time slows. Blue does not feel like a color here. It feels like a presence, like an atmosphere, like a reminder of how fragile light truly is. To stand there is to feel as though you are inside the lungs of the planet, exhaling across millennia. It is vast, it is calm, it is not meant for us. Yet here we are, feeling its weight. Could the blue shadows of glaciers be something more than light bent by ice? Could they be the visible echo of time itself, reminding us that all memory, even frozen, has color? And yet, if glaciers carve both beauty and silence into stone, what happens to the relics they guard? The bodies, the fossils, the seeds, all the fragments of life pressed deep into their frozen memory? Within the frost, Time does not behave as it does in warmth. Decay slows, entropy waits, and the boundaries between past and present grow blurry. What lies beneath the blue shadows of glaciers is not only ice, but archives of lives abruptly paused in their unfolding. Imagine walking across frozen tundra and coming upon the shape of a mammoth revealed by melting ice. Its fur still clings to skin, its tusks gleam pale against the frost, its last meal still preserved within its stomach. Not fossilized in stone, but fossilized in pause, as if it were caught mid-breath in a world that forgot how to move forward. Ice can hold not only the bones but the very soft tissues that would crumble anywhere else. Blood cells, strands of hair, even whispers of DNA that continue to speak long after the animal itself is gone. Could it be that the frost is less a tomb than a time machine, folding creatures forward into the present long after their world has vanished? But it is not always grand animals buried in ice. Sometimes it is dusting traces almost invisible, a grain of pollen, a fragment of moss, a delicate insect wing sealed into permafrost. These too are fossils, not because they turned to rock, but because they endured where they should have dissolved. In these small remains lies evidence of what grew, what bloomed, what drifted in breezes long extinguished. To hold a fragment of ancient pollen pressed into ice is to hold the memory of a summer that no human eye ever saw. Could it be that the frost remembers seasons more faithfully than memory itself? In the deep past, fossilization usually required heat, pressure, minerals, the slow turning of bone into stone. But in the extremes of cold, another pathway emerges: preservation through stillness. Entropy's hand grows numb in the silence of frost, and what should decay remains whole. In permafrost, even bacterial activity lingers weakly, slowed to near dormancy. A body rests not in completion, but in suspension, waiting in the most fragile state of all. For it is not eternal, the thaw can undo millennia within days. Ice preserves flawlessly, yet holds everything in a precarious balance, like a fragile breath held too long. Scientists who open these frozen tombs find isotopes locked within the tissues, revealing diet, climate, even migration. Carbon tells the story of plants consumed, nitrogen ratios reveal where an animal fed, oxygen speaks of the water it drank and the lands it crossed. In each isotope is a diary of choices once made by a being that no longer breathes. We do not only recover bodies from ice, we recover their lives. And yet, how much of that life is truly knowable? Perhaps the frost preserves enough to whisper, but never enough to answer fully. Maybe its secret is not clarity, but suggestion. What if the ice holds more than biology? What if, in the deepest sense, it holds forgotten echoes of entire ecosystems? Microbes of ancient lineages trapped in stasis, seeds that, when thawed carefully, still grow, spores waiting 500,000 years for warmth. Life not extinct, but paused, waiting for a touch of sun. Could it be that the frost contains futures as well as pasts, that what is sealed away is not only history, but potential? And yet, underneath this quiet awe lies an unease, because we know this archive is not permanent. As glaciers retreat and permafrost cracks, these fossils awaken. DNA unravels back into dust, spores rejoin the air, organic matter decays into nothing. The frost may guard memory, but it guards it only on loan. What we call fossils in the frost may one day be nothing more than silence again. Is it possible that all of Earth's memory rests on things as fragile as the balance between ice and thaw? The thought lingers, heavy as the cold itself. Memory can endure, but never forever. Even in the best of preservation, entropy waits patiently. And so, we walk among landscapes where the past sometimes surfaces in strange clarity, reminding us that nothing is ever truly gone, just layered, waiting, paused until touched again. And yet, if the frost keeps such fragile remnants of life, preserving the smallest seed as carefully as the largest beast, what of time itself? Could snow, drifting quietly, falling without notice, become more than a blanket upon the world? Could it be the very clock by which memory is kept? Each flake landing upon another, pressed by weight, hardened by cold, becomes not only surface, but record. Snow does not merely cover, counts. In the imagination, time is often thought of as something moving forward, linear, like a river flowing endlessly downstream. But under an eternal ice age, time gathers differently. It arrives in layers. Each winter writes itself upon the land, settling softly, only to be hidden by the next. A fresh sheet of silence, stacking upon another, until centuries take on the texture of sediment, and millennia press downward into solid ice. Snowfall is not the absence of history, but its transcription. Could it be that time often hides itself not in motion but in accumulation, in quiet weight pressing ever deeper? Scientists treat these stacks like diaries. To drill into an ice core is to peel through chapters written in dust and frozen vapor. A layer of volcanic ash tells of a mountain that once collapsed in fire. A faint spike of sulfur hints at storms sweeping from distant seas. Even the tiniest grain of desert sand, lifted by winds and carried across continents, embeds itself in polar ice, whispering of droughts in places thousands of miles away. Each snowfall is not local, not finite, but global. To hold a cylinder of ancient ice in your hands is to hold an atlas of Earth, mapped not by rivers and peaks but by particles carried in silence. And all through the ice, there is rhythm. Summers bring layers of coarse frost. Winters bring fine, delicate crystals. Year after year, the layering continues, not perfectly even, but faithfully present. A trained eye can count years the way we count tree rings, unfolding the chronology of hidden seasons long before we existed. In some ice cores, we can track not just centuries, but hundreds of thousands of years, deep time itself measured in sheets of snow. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this. Somewhere beneath us, in the deepest frost, lie snows that fell when the first humans were yet unborn, when mammoths still walked in herds, when continents lay differently than they do today. But what is most remarkable is how snow remembers silence as much as event. A year without storms is recorded not by marks, but by the absence of marks. A year of dustless skies becomes a layer of purity, an empty page within the diary of a planet. Could it be that silence itself is as important to memory as noise? That what did not happen, the delays, the pauses, are preserved as strongly as the crashes of eruption? In this way, snowfall teaches us that time is not simply the record of event, but of stillness too. And yet, the archive is delicate. Pressure eventually transforms snow crystals to firn, then to ice. Tiny bubbles are trapped inside, bubbles that hold the breath of ancient atmospheres. Within them lie ratios of oxygen and carbon, data that reveal not just temperature but the very mood of climates forgotten. These whispers of chemistry show us warm periods before we knew warmth, ice expansions before we tamed fire. They tell us that the climate cycles always back and forth, through cold and less cold, as though Earth itself inhales and exhales on timescales beyond our comprehension. What is 1,000 years to a planet that measures life in millions? Maybe not even a breath. And yet, captured in snow, that breath endures long enough for us to read. There is a rhythm in imagining it. Snow upon snow, silence upon silence, time pressing itself into the deep earth, waiting. It is not the ticking of a clock, not the swing of a pendulum, but the endless fall of light particles drifting from clouds, each one anonymous, each one joining the weight below until together they are history. Time measured not by movement, but by stillness layered, one breath upon the next. And perhaps, if we think of ourselves inside that rhythm, we too are layers, moments pressed upon moments, each stacked on the last, waiting to be remembered. Could it be that memory itself functions like snowfall, moments soft at first, then compressed, hardened, until they shape us the way ice shapes the land? And when pressure grows enough, when too many layers have been pressed together, the clarity of individual flakes disappears, merging into blue, into translucence, into something whole. Maybe this is how identity works. Fragile details erased by years, yet still part of the greater structure. To sleep beneath such thoughts is to feel that time itself is always falling, gently, invisibly, upon us. Each moment stacks, each memory compresses. Nothing is ever truly gone. It is only buried, waiting for someone someday to drill deep enough to listen carefully enough to find it once more. Snowfall as calendar, snowfall as memory, snowfall as time. And yet, if time itself can be measured in something so fragile as snow, then what of the mysteries hidden still deeper beneath it, the landscapes and perhaps even civilizations sealed away in silence, never seen beneath their frozen tombs? For snow and ice do more than archive air, or pollen, or the record of storms. They are also veils, spreading across continents, concealing what came before. Beneath kilometers of deep ice, whole worlds may lie erased from our sight, their stories suspended in shadows we will never touch. We know, of course, that glaciers advance and retreat. Under them lie mountains worn smooth, valleys gouged open, rivers bent into new courses. But what if, in some forgotten epoch, ice swept over more than stone? What if it swallowed memory itself, settlements, cities, lives? Perhaps these traces of lost humanity or something even older rest now in abyssal silence, their rooftops buried beneath blue sheets so heavy, so unyielding, that no archaeology could ever disturb them. Could it be that the greatest ruins on Earth remain hidden not under oceans, but beneath glaciers, waiting in stillness? This is not entirely imagination. Scientists already know that beneath the Antarctic ice, there are mountain ranges the size of the Alps, unseen for millions of years. Deep beneath Greenland, valleys stretch wide enough to carry rivers, hidden from the surface beneath 2 kilometers of ice. Entire landscapes, preserved like fossils, shielded from erosion, untouched by the winds and storms above. If such vast terrain can remain concealed, is it impossible to think that traces of civilizations, even fragile ones, may also rest below? Not as buildings we recognize, but as interruptions in sediments, anomalies in isotopes, the quiet fingerprints of fire and agriculture now obscured by silence. And perhaps those hidden worlds need not belong to us. For the age of humans is brief against deep time. Before we built monuments, before we left our technofossils scattered across the globe, Earth has seen countless rises and extinctions. What if species we never knew carved dwellings, raised shelters, created languages that left no mark save for fragments sealed in permafrost? It may sound like myth, but when we peer into deep time, the absence of evidence often masks the evidence of absence. Could it be that ice, in its quietest way, erased not only landscapes but entire chapters of Earth's story? The imagination leans further still. Consider the effect of glaciation on entropy. Ice slows decay, presses artifacts into stasis. Wood resists rot, bones keep their strength, cloth stiffens but endures. Even metals may linger, trapped away from air and corrosion. A ruin beneath ice would not crumble the way ruins do in sunlit deserts or humid jungles. It would be frozen mid-collapse, caught forever in a moment between life and loss. What if below the Antarctic sheet there rests not only rock, but the faint geometries of forgotten walls? Not preserved forever, but preserved, waiting. And what of memory? For even if we cannot reach these worlds, the ice itself remembers in subtle ways. Dust in frozen layers may speak of fires kindled by intelligent hands, distinguishing them from volcanic ash. Isotopic signatures of sudden atmospheric changes might reveal unexpected patterns, tiny anomalies hinting at activity we do not understand. It may be possible that what no ruin can tell us, the air trapped in bubbles may still confess. Could lost civilizations whisper not from their stones but from the chemistry of their age, written in silence? There are times when science edges into speculation, not out of recklessness, but out of humility. For we know this: glaciers hide landscapes, ice holds secrets, and history is always more fragile than we believe. Civilizations have risen and fallen many times in even the known span of human culture. Entire cultures, entire languages, entire ways of life slipped away in centuries so brief they barely left a mark. If this much can be lost in warmth, how much more could be erased beneath kilometers of frost? And yet the thought is not without wonder. To imagine such hidden archives is to imagine that the Earth itself is keeping memories that even we cannot destroy. Glaciers recycle landscapes, oceans bury sediments, tectonic plates swallow continents. Still, Ice remains one of the gentlest keepers. Not final, not eternal, but long enough to remind us that forgetting is never absolute. Somewhere below, there could be rooms of air untouched since before recorded time. There could be artifacts of lives erased from memory. There could be whole stories waiting without urgency, sleeping, as the ice preserves them gently in shadows of blue. Perhaps we will never find them. Perhaps the weight is too great, the distance is too deep. But knowing that they might exist shapes the way we think of ourselves. It teaches us that the surface of Earth is only one layer, and beneath that layer, there are others, pages pressed shut, unread. What if the very identity of Earth is to forget and to remember all at once? What if what we have lost is not truly gone, but only sealed beneath a silence we have not yet learned to open? And yet, if civilizations can sink unseen beneath the ice, their voices preserved by silence but hidden from us forever, what then of the ground that holds them, the frozen soil, the permafrost itself, that strange halfway state between life and stone? Unlike glaciers, which move and flow, permafrost sits still. It is land locked in suspension, never fully alive, never fully erased. To step upon it is to place your weight on an archive that has been waiting for thousands of years. Every root, every leaf, every fragment of bone that entered it is caught in pause, unable to decay because the frost disallows it, unable to revive because warmth has abandoned it. Beneath these frozen layers, memory lingers with astonishing clarity. Ancient DNA remains intact, threads of genetic code belonging to creatures that walked the Ice Age steps, to plants that bloomed before human cultures were born. In permafrost, we have found horses preserved down to their cells, seeds that still germinate after tens of thousands of years, and mammoth hair bound with proteins that still whisper of long-vanished diets. Such discoveries remind us that the past does not vanish neatly. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it hums in silence, like echoes pressed beneath the frozen crust of land. But permafrost holds more than the organic. It captures what we have left behind, too. Plastic fibers drawn down by meltwater, fragments of metal, residues of fuel, traces of pesticides, shadows of cities carried by wind and snow. These are technofossils, artifacts of a species whose presence has begun to embed itself into stone, soil, and ice. Perhaps many millennia from now, if permafrost still clings to its silence, it will preserve our age the way it once preserved mammoths, not by intention but by accident, not as a monument but as debris. Could it be that our most enduring memory will not be our words or our art, but the scraps of material we forgot to retrieve from the land? Scientists read this archive the way they read the rings of trees or the bands of ice cores. Isotopes within frozen soils reveal what the atmosphere once carried. Ratios of carbon and nitrogen embed stories of drought or abundance. Even methane bubbles, caught beneath frost, whisper of shifts in temperature, of climates teetering between breath and suffocation. In this sense, the permafrost is not just a grave, it is a witness. It remembers not only what lived upon it, but also how the very planet breathed while those beings lived. Could it be that the soil beneath our feet has always been listening? And yet, there is fragility here. Preservation is not eternity. With thaw comes release. Bodies that seemed immortal tumble quickly into ruin. DNA unravels into silence. Microbes once frozen begin to stir again, reawakening after dormancy measured not in seasons but in epochs. Some emerge harmless. Others bring with them reminders of epochs we believed we had left behind. Viruses, bacteria, forgotten companions of lost animals. It is unsettling, but perhaps fitting, that the past does not vanish quietly. It waits beneath frost, ready to return in forms we do not expect. This thought reminds us that memory is not only passive. It is alive even when frozen. Every preserved fragment in the permafrost is both a record of what was and a potential of what could be again. The soil is a library, but it is also a seedbed. It holds history not only as story but as possibility. Could the species entombed in ice still walk again through the hands of science or through the accidents of thaw? Could permafrost be less a tomb than a doorway, less an ending than an interval of silence before the next chapter of life begins? And if so, what does that mean for us? If the ground holds our voices as surely as it holds the voices of mammoths and moss, what will remain of us in the cold sleep of 1,000 years? A fiber of cloth, the imprint of a boot, a fleck of microplastic that may be our echo. Perhaps, when the frost of tomorrow opens, it will speak of us not with grandeur but with fragments. Maybe the story of humanity will one day be retold by the permafrost itself, not as history books or monuments, but as silent remains pressed into its frozen soil. And yet, if even the soil can listen, if frozen ground can preserve both life and artifact, then what stories might rise when night falls on the endless plains of ice, when silence meets starlight and the world reflects not only the memory of land, but of cosmos? Imagine a desert not of sand, but of frost, an infinite plateau of white stretching outward in every direction. Above it, skies sharpen with clarity, stars burning with a stillness rarely seen in warmer worlds. For in the absence of warmth, moisture withdraws, air steadies, and atmosphere loses the haze that so often clouds our vision. The heavens open in startling precision. The earth, in her frozen poise, becomes a mirror for the stars. Night upon such a surface would not behave the way it does now. White deserts do not swallow starlight, they multiply it. Light bounces and scatters across ice plains, turning every horizon into a faint, unearthly glow. A single star above might seem to have 1,000 reflections below, shimmering like fragments of forgotten constellations. Could it be that in a frozen earth, the sky and land would blend into each other, each echoing the other, until the line between cosmos and ground dissolved completely? Perhaps to walk such landscapes would feel like walking among the stars themselves. In this frozen condition, time itself would change its texture. The length of day and night is dictated by Earth's turning, but the perception of it would alter in eternal frost. Without the color of soil and trees, without the rhythm of green warmth rising and retreating, night would not feel separate from day. The white surface would glow under moonlight, under starlight, under faint auroras bending slowly through the sky. Shadows would dance differently, soft and elongated, as though not only space but time itself had been stretched thin across the ice. Could it be that in this eternal reflection, our very sense of hours, of seasons, of progress would dissolve, replaced by a world where all moments seem to fold into the same pale silence? Scientists know that the albedo, the reflectivity, of snow is one of the strongest governors of planetary climate. More reflection means less absorption, more cooling, and the deepening of ice. In such a world, light scarcely warms the surface. Instead, it escapes again into space, carrying heat with it. What would centuries of such reflection shape in us, in our imaginations? Perhaps we would come to see starlight not as distant, but as intimate, for it would live all around us in reflection, touching every step, every ridge, every breath. Light would not only illumine, it would surround. Fossils layered beneath such plains would record these cold skies. Isotopes of oxygen in ice would shift subtly with the faint warmth of starlight filtered through endless winters. Bubbles of air locked in crystals would carry ratios altered by the play of light upon atmosphere. Even silence registers itself in chemistry, and star-soaked nights may have written themselves into the frozen calendar of the world. Maybe, when we study those layers millions of years later, we are not only reading the record of storms and volcanoes, but the quiet handwriting of the night sky pressed invisibly into ice. And there, within this eternal twilight, we might begin to feel something more than science, an existential quietness seated by cosmic scale. To stand on such reflective plains would be to feel folded into the universe, with no boundary keeping sky from earth, self from world. Could it be that under endless frost, one could hardly tell if they were looking down or up, into the soil of the planet or into the canvas of stars? If time, too, reflects upon itself, looping endlessly, repeating its slow measures like starlight bouncing across white horizons, then what does it mean for us here, now with our fleeting memories? And yet, even this desert of light is temporary. Stars drift through their own rhythms, galaxies shift, entropy gathers. The reflection on ice is not eternal, Eventually even frost erodes, even stars extinguish. The white desert is not permanent, but it carries with it the most delicate illusion of eternity, a mirror image of the cosmos suspended in blue cold. Maybe this is what silence means across deep time, that stillness is only a pause in movement, reflection only a moment before fading, light only the brief echo of fire billions of years old. And yet, if starlight can turn winter plains into cosmic mirrors, shaping even our perception of time, what happens when fire intrudes into that silence? When the earth quakes below and volcanoes erupt beneath the ice, forcing warmth to collide with frost in sudden, violent whispers? And yet, if starlight can turn winter plains into cosmic mirrors, shaping even our perception of time, what happens when the light fades back to earth, and we notice not only the sky above but the scars upon the land below? For glaciers are not just blankets of silence or archives of snow. They are engines. Slow, patient engines sculpting continents, grinding stone into memory. To look at a glacier from the surface is to see stillness. But look at the valleys it leaves behind, and you can read the invisible machinery that worked there for ages. Glacial erosion operates not in moments but in epochs. A single boulder carried beneath a moving wall of ice becomes a chisel, a blade pressed against bedrock. Thousands of such stones grind together, dragged along as though weightless, though each could break a human hand with ease. Layer after layer, year after year, whole mountains are scored and reshaped beneath what otherwise appears to be a frozen river asleep. It is humbling to imagine. The softest element, water, transformed into the agent that can carve granite. Could it be that, in this, glaciers remind us that power is not always loud? That the greatest changes come not from sudden bursts, but from quiet persistence? We see their signatures across the earth even now. U-shaped valleys where rivers once cut narrow, jagged canyons. Fjords where seas now flood spaces once pressed by ice. Polished rocks, striated surfaces, scattered boulders deposited hundreds of miles from their origin. Each one is a remnant of movement, the handwriting of ice inscribed not in symbols but in scars. Maybe geologists are not only readers of stone. Maybe they are readers of silence carved into stone. And when we walk in those valleys now, surrounded by green forests or calm lakes, it may be easy to forget that once, walls of blue ice edged across the horizon like slow-moving continents of their own. The mechanics are deceptively simple. Ice flows under the pressure of its own weight. Crevasses spread, basal layers melt slightly, lubrication allows movement. The glacier doesn't slide so much as deform, its particles shifting in crystalline migration. Each grain of ice resettles under gravity, pushing fragments of rock along with it. Rocks grind against rocks, carving arcs across the continent. Sediment is dragged outward as moraine, building ridges when the ice retreats. Geological maps of the world are, in many places, maps of where glaciers have already walked. Could we say, then, that continents don't only drift upon tectonic plates, but also upon waves of ice that occasionally reshape them? Time under a glacier feels almost irrelevant. For us, a century is long. For ice, it is a step. Valleys are not designed but revealed. Mountains not destroyed but softened into new forms. As entropy pushes everything toward dissolution, glaciers, too, add their verse. They grind, they polish, they transport, and though they never hurry, their work remains long after they are gone. Perhaps this is how memory works as well. Not in sudden clarity, but in quiet repetition that reshapes us slowly, until we hardly realize the form we have become. And yet glaciers offer more than force. They offer paradox. They preserve even as they destroy. Within their grinding bodies are fossils, dust, even whole carcasses hurled forward in frozen stasis, saved by the very ice that erodes everything else. Erosion, then, is not just subtraction but transformation. What if every scar on the earth is also an archive? What if every valley is not just absence but story? Could it be that erosion is simply memory written in negative space, the world saying not only what happened but also what used to be here? Scientists searching these valleys often deploy isotopic analysis, reading quartz and feldspar for evidence of when they last saw light. Rocks buried beneath glaciers for millennia carry different chemical balances from those left on the surface. In this way, stone itself becomes testimony. Geological evidence is not loud, it does not declare, but it accumulates, pressed into silence until someone learns to listen. Maybe that is what glaciers teach us most. The earth is speaking always, though never in haste. And when glaciers retreat, they do not close the book, they turn the page. Lakes form in carved basins. Rivers rearrange. Soils regenerate across scraped plains. Life returns, carrying seeds, spores, roots into landscapes where ice once ruled. In this way, the machinery of glacial erosion is also machinery of renewal. Could it be that even destruction is only another way of preparing? That the earth reshapes itself not by erasing, but by rewriting subtle drafts? As we wander through these thoughts, it becomes increasingly clear that glaciers are not only guardians of memory but sculptors of form, bending the world we recognize into its present shapes. Valleys, plains, waters, all carry the touch of frost long vanished. The Earth's carved face is a fossil of ice, a reminder that what moves slowly can still change everything. And yet, if stone itself carries the scars of ice, then what happens when fire breaks through beneath the frozen ceiling, when volcanoes rise in secret under glaciers, bringing eruption into silence and turning frost into steam before our eyes? For even in a world locked by cold, the interior of Earth does not still. Beneath its crust, molten rivers flow, pressure builds, plates collide, and magma prepares its ancient ascents through fractures invisible to us. The surface may be bound in silence, but below, fire waits with patience as deep as ice itself. When volcanoes erupt beneath glaciers, the world changes in strange and sudden ways. Heat collides with cold, liquefying kilometers of ice in moments. Caverns of meltwater swell in darkness, then burst outward in what geologists call jokulhlops. Floods that can tear apart valleys with catastrophic force, yet leave little trace once the water retreats and ice closes again. Steam pours upward through cracks, carrying shards of ash, dust, and chemical signatures into skies already subdued by snow. Such plumes darken the whiteness, a reminder that nothing, not even ice thick as mountains, can silence the breath of Earth's inner fire. Imagine standing upon an endless plain of frost, nothing moving as far as the eye can see, and then, without warning, the snow trembles. Beneath your feet, deep below layers of permafrost and compressed ice, magma rises. Heat meets cold in an ancient argument. Rock and frozen water hiss into vapor, a dialogue of extremes. In moments, lakes appear where glaciers once rested undisturbed. Mountains of ice collapse inward, reshaped by what was never meant to reach the surface. Could it be that Earth writes some of its most profound stories not in one language of elements, but in the collision of opposites? Ice surrendering to fire, fire smothered by ice? Science has studied these encounters as carefully as it can, drilling into volcanic districts beneath polar caps, searching for isotopic signatures, layering chemical trails against geologic records. Each eruption leaves silent fossils, not of bone, but of ash grains trapped in ice, frozen pages of black dust within white. They tell us of times when Earth reminded the ice that it is only a covering, not a cage. They tell us that even as entropy slows above ground, movement never stops below. Perhaps there is comfort in that. Perhaps even in the silence of deep winter, Earth continues to move through shadows, unseen, breathing its hidden fire. These encounters are not new. Iceland carries their memory in its landscapes. Rivers born from ice floods, valleys split where glacial lakes once shattered. Antarctica buries its volcanoes beneath thick domes of frost, some still active, heat rising quietly from the ground. If we could lift the ice from those places, we would see mountains red with fire, alive in a land otherwise bound in white. And yet the glacier remains, pressing downward, trying to still what cannot be stilled. Fire and ice, opposites entwined, each reshaping the other. Ice confines, fire rebounds. Their dialogue is eternal. Could it be that this duality reflects something deeper in us? That memory of silence and memory of fire exist side by side within ourselves. Apathetic stillness against restless motion, preservation against destruction? Maybe glaciers and volcanoes are mirrors of this balance, reminding us that identity is shaped as much by collision as by calm. Not because one dominates, but because both endure. Volcanic heat beneath ice does more than melt. It alters gases, feeds oxygen-resistant microbes, seeds environments where strange forms of life emerge. To us, they may look fragile bacteria clinging to fissures, but perhaps they are hints of life's resilience in colder, older worlds. Could it be that this very meeting of fire and frost models how life might endure on other planets, where beneath frozen shells warmth rises slowly from within? Not as abundance, but as persistence, not as noise, but as quiet survival. In this way, eruptions beneath ice remind us that no silence is absolute. Beneath stillness, movement persists. Beneath death, something always stirs. Ice can seal, but fire always finds a pathway upward. Steam always finds a crack to escape. Maybe this is a lesson, that nothing remains wholly hidden, that even in a frozen earth, warmth insists upon making itself known. And yet, if fire can rise within a frozen world, what else is hidden in the chemistry itself? What messages remain not in light or in stone, but in the isotopes embedded within the frozen layers? Whispers of invisible histories still held in the elements of the ice. For beneath the visible world of glaciers and valleys, there exists another archive, one written not in fossils or ruins, but in the language of atoms. To study isotopes is to lean close to the planet's breath, to listen for subtle inflections so quiet they cannot be heard in any other way. Oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, each element carries variations, small shifts in weight, differences in neutron count that are invisible to the eye yet speak volumes about the past. Within the frozen strata, those isotopic ratios are preserved perfectly, as though time itself chose to keep a copy of the climate, the atmosphere, the very radiation that once bathed the Earth. Could it be that ice is not merely frozen water, but frozen memory at the smallest scale, atoms whispering secrets across millennia? When scientists read the layers of a core drilled from Greenland or Antarctica, they are not only counting years, they are interpreting isotopes as diaries. Oxygen, 18 declines in years of chill, rises in periods of warmth. Carbon-14, twisted by cosmic rays, becomes a marker of solar cycles, centuries of fluctuations in the star, above us written into silent layers of frost. Even beryllium-10, rare and fleeting, tells of cosmic storms, ages when the Earth's shield was brushed heavily by radiation from galaxies beyond. All of it, preserved in ice that never thawed, waiting for minds millions of years later to ask the right questions. And here the thought turns stranger. For what is a sunless world but a place where isotopes become more reliable storytellers than the senses? Imagine an Earth locked in ice, its skies dimmed, its life curtailed. Above, stars still shine, but their rays reach only muted landscapes. Below, tiny atoms continue their ceaseless record, not concerned with whether light is bright or faint, whether life abounds or retreats. While civilizations vanish, while forests shrink, while oceans sleep, isotopes continue marking time, silent witnesses that never forget. Could it be that the most faithful memory of a frozen planet is stored not in animals, not in stories, but in the very fabric of chemical variants? Entropy touches everything eventually, yet isotopes remind us that even entropy leaves its fingerprints. Decay itself becomes signal. Carbon shifts, nitrogen adjusts, isotopes decay at half-lives steady as heartbeat. By this, we measure time beyond the reach of calendars, beyond memory, beyond language. To hold an ice core speckled with isotopic signatures is to hold the residue of cosmic storms, of vanished heat, of landscapes obliterated by frost. It is to hold a vast mirror not of what was seen, but of what was endured. Perhaps the strangest part is this: isotopes record events humans could not have witnessed. Solar flares that struck before mammals walked the Earth. Periods of magnetic reversal when compasses would have spun aimlessly, yet life carried on. Shadows of mass extinctions in the ratios of carbon, entire ecosystems collapsing reduced to molecular evidence. And perhaps still stranger, isotopes also record us. Our use of fuels, our sudden exhalation of carbon into the sky, our abrupt rewriting of atmospheric chemistry. In this way, we too are folded into the sunless record, preserved not by choice but by inevitability. Could it be that the planet does not differentiate between epochs natural or artificial, but treats all equally as signatures written into ice? Close your eyes and imagine it. Kilometers of frozen water pressing down in silence. Within every thin layer is a voice you cannot hear, yet it waits, patient, eternal, almost luminous in its invisibility. To study isotopes here is to hear whispers through glass. Reminders that even in darkness, even in cold, nothing passes without leaving its trace. Time is not only movement but accumulation, the world writing itself in figures so small we cannot feel them, yet so durable they stretch across millions of years. Maybe a sunless world is not silent at all, but singing constantly in isotopic tones only science can translate. And yet, as we lean into these frozen chemistries, another thought emerges. If ice itself is a memory bank, a vault of isotopes and dreams, then could glaciers be more than witnesses? Could the ice sheets themselves be the books of the planet, each page pressed with the weight of ages, each line traced with storms, extinctions, and silences that shaped the world in ways we will never fully recover? Unlike rock, which takes millions of years to fold and harden, ice retains a signature almost instantly, a snowfall hardened into glass that holds the atmosphere inside like a message in a bottle. To gaze upon a glacier is to gaze upon a tape recorder of climate, still running, still layering its story year after year, without pause. Deep within ice sheets stretching kilometers below the surface, the pressure is unimaginable, every flake pressed into crystalline density, every trapped bubble a vault. Within these bubbles are fragments of vanished air, breaths exhaled by forests of another age, sighs of volcanoes, even the fossils of atmospheres before human voices were ever heard. In this way, an ice sheet is not just frozen water. It is the accumulation of silence, the safeguarding of entropy, a shifting but faithful register of countless cycles that played out long before we ever measured them with tools. Could it be that these white expanses are not just landscapes but living archives, memory banks carrying the weight of planetary time across eons, each one vast enough to hold epochs in its stillness? Scientists who drill deep into these reserves describe a kind of awe as the cores emerge from the ice. Cylinders marked not in visible colors but in ratios, in tiny chemical shifts, in records of vanished eras invisible to the naked eye but clear in their data. Each fragment recalls cycles of warmth and cold, of abundance and famine written into pale layers. The story told by ice is not linear, not ordered neatly, but looping, folding back on itself. There are episodes of sudden volcanic winters, their ashes still etched in the clarity of layers, pauses in solar radiance traced by isotope fluctuations, epochs of extinction felt in long silences in pollen counts embedded deep within frost. Perhaps this is what makes ice such an uncanny witness. It never editorializes, it never decides what is important. Keeps everything. Even silence is written down. But ice does more than preserve, it amplifies. The sheer scale of these ice sheets alters ocean levels, bends the crust beneath their weight, presses depressions into earth that linger long after retreat. In holding memory, they also shape the future, controlling climate feedbacks, regulating temperatures, deciding how entropy will distribute itself across time. In this sense, glaciers are more than memory keepers, they are active players in the story of Earth, both recording and reshaping history at once. Could memory itself be both passive and active, both archive and architect? Maybe the planet reminds us that keeping the past and creating the future may not be as separate as we believe. And yet, even ice forgets. Warmth comes, layers melt, bubbles vanish. The record is clipped and shortened before it is complete. Ice sheets are vast, but they are not permanent. As entropy advances, as climates change, the library begins to dissolve, its pages dripping away into oceans. Perhaps this is the most fragile truth. Memory is never eternal. Even planetary memory held in vastness measured in kilometers and epochs is temporary. Maybe the world teaches us here that no record, no matter how large, escapes forgetting forever. Still, the thought is haunting. Above ground we live in fleeting minutes, but beneath us ice is carrying on its quiet duty, holding the ruins, the extinctions, the silences, the dust, waiting patiently until someone reads it. To lie awake and think of this is to imagine Earth itself as a kind of consciousness, one that never hurries, one that never needs to forget in the way we do, but instead places every moment into storage, unselective, preparing a record no one may ever hear. Could it be that this is the truest definition of memory on planetary scales? Accumulation without judgment, without choice, entropy carefully retained rather than erased. And in this way, ice leaves us with an unsettling comfort. To be remembered is not always permanent, but to be forgotten is never absolute. Somewhere, a trace persists. For us, for forests, for seas, for cultures, there is always some echo layered invisibly into the record, waiting in silence. Perhaps the idea of the planet's memory is not that it recalls names or places, but that it holds the conditions into which stories were written. It may not remember exactly who we are, but it remembers the sky we breathed, the air we reshaped with fires, the echoes we left through isotopes and dust. And that, in a way, is still memory. And yet, if the ice sheets themselves act as planetary storehouses, if memory is written page by page in frozen silence, what of silence itself? Could absence, the muting of voices, the swallowing of sound, the hush of a frozen century, be treated not as emptiness but as a climate in its own right? We measure climates in temperatures, in rainfall, in winds and storms. But perhaps on an earth held in perpetual frost, silence would descend as tangibly as snow, felt not only in the ear but on the skin, in the heart, in the very pace of thought. Imagine standing on the open plain of a frozen desert. Wind moves across it, yes, but every howl is dulled, scattered by the ridges of crystalline snow. A river beneath the ice tries to rush forward, yet its voice is smothered, pressed flat until only a faint vibration betrays its motion. Even the movement of dust is muted here. Storms do not rattle with anger. They drift like slow, soundless veils across the light. It is not the silence of rooms or of sleeping cities. This is silence that has weight, silence that covers you like a sky. Could it be that in such a world, we would come to define ourselves not against landscapes of sound, but against expanses of stillness? If silence is climate, it shapes us as surely as heat or cold. A newborn in this world might learn to speak more softly, carrying in their lungs an instinct to match the hush they are born into. Cultures might turn reverent toward the unspoken, shaping languages full not of loud words but of pauses, the spaces between syllables weighted with meaning. Music might exist only as faint rhythms tapped into ice, vibrations meant more for feeling than for hearing. Is it possible that silence could sculpt thought itself, leading to minds that reflect, pause, stretch longer between impulses? Perhaps in such a frozen hush, identity would deepen rather than scatter, each self as complete as a valley pressed into being by glaciers unseen. Even science tells us that silence is not absence. The world breathes quietly around us. Frequencies below our hearing moving through stone, through water, through air. Glaciers creak, shifting slowly against bedrock. Permafrost expands and contracts, whispering in movements so gradual that years pass before the sound completes its sentence. Dust drifting through air carries electric charges, faint static murmurs we do not notice. If silence is climate, then it is one filled with inaudible weather currents we sense only as pressure on the bones, vibrations in the feet, a subtle awareness that the planet is never truly still. We often think of sound as a measure of life, noise as proof of presence. Yet fossils remind us that some of the greatest extinctions passed not in explosions but in silences. Forests fading without birdsong, reefs dissolving without the crackle of shrimp or fish, atmosphere shifting in ways no creature could perceive until it was too late. Silence was the climate of extinction then, just as much as fire or flood. Could it be that silence leaves a deeper trace than we realize, that the absence of sound is its own geological signal, its own kind of fossil written into memory? To rest within this thought is to feel the rhythm of repetition. Silence arrives, then breaks, then returns again. Each wave is real as a season, each pause carrying as much weight as a storm. In this way, silence becomes cyclical, part of the planet's breath. Not because nothing happens, but because what happens becomes muffled, preserved differently, recorded not with shouts but with whispers. Maybe silence is not opposite to life, but only another register of it. Not absence, but a climate slow enough that our ears never learn to follow. And yet, if silence itself can be considered a climate, wrapping the world in an atmosphere as present as ice or air, then what do we make of its endless spread across horizons of frost, where entropy itself seems to blur into repetition, and white stretches into white in a sameness that feels like time dissolving at the edges of sight? To stand upon such a frozen plain is to feel pulled away from ordinary markers. No tree breaks the skyline. No stone interrupts the drift. Everywhere the view is the same, white ground blending into white sky, distinction slowly washing out, until you begin to wonder if the world itself has forgotten how to hold contrast. Entropy is often thought of as decay, the slide toward disorder. But here, on the white horizon of endless frost, it feels almost like the opposite. Not chaos but sameness. Not breakdown but smoothing. Valleys filled. Ridges softened. Colors muted into a single palette stretched in every direction you look. Entropy here does not roar. It erases. It makes everything feel infinite by repetition, dissolving the edges of identity until you cannot tell one moment from another, one place from the vastness stretching beyond it. Could it be that, in a frozen earth, entropy is not heat dispersing into cold, but distinction dispersing into white? Scientists speak of entropy as inevitability, the gradual loss of usable energy, the washing out of contrast in physical systems. In ice, that inevitability becomes visible. A glacier takes sharp rock and turns it smooth. Fresh snow falls in complex fractals, but pressed into weight, it becomes uniform crystal, translucent blue. Even life held in permafrost appears intact on the surface, yet beneath, slow chemistry blurs its edges. Proteins unravel. DNA strands weaken. Nothing is destroyed violently. Rather, all things gradually soften into resemblance, into sameness, into silence. Maybe entropy, at least in this frozen register, is not destruction but a slow blending of difference. And yet, there is beauty in this blurring. Staring outward across ice fields where horizon vanishes into horizon, you may begin to feel weightless in perception, as if your body itself dissolves into the vast plane of chill repetition. The self, which clings so strongly to detail, so hungrily to memory, begins to falter when faced with such sameness. Where do you end, and the horizon begin? Where does your thought resist entropy, and where is it absorbed by it? Perhaps identity is as fragile as a fossil grain caught in drifting snow. Unique for a time, but destined to be pressed down, buried, and joined into something larger. Geology tells us that horizons like these often conceal restless movement beneath. Under white monotony, tectonic plates still shift, mountain ranges still push upward, oceans subduct quietly into the mantle. Deep time continues, indifferent to surfaces. Yet from above, it feels eternal, absent of motion or purpose. Could it be that eternity itself is simply concentration without distinction, entropy experienced not as loss, but as the repetition of presence? White on white, year upon year, giving the illusion of rest. Atmospheric change is written in these horizons too. Carbon cycles halt, gases freeze, isotopes level out. The chemistry of variation is locked beneath equilibrium and quiet. The landscape reflects more light than it holds, deepening the chill, reinforcing the impression that even warmth has little power here. Over billions of years, such conditions could trap the planet in loops of sameness, where each century is indistinguishable from the last. Maybe in such spans, time itself would stop feeling directional, becoming simply depth, layer upon layer of white horizons stretching backward into silence. And yet entropy, though relentless, also carries release. On the horizon of endless frost, the dissolution of detail also releases things from their burden of form. A jagged landscape becomes fluid. The sharpness of color melts into calm. Fossils of moments collapse into patterns too wide to notice. Is this not also freedom? Could it be that the self, like the land, finds relief in losing shape, in surrendering to continuum? Perhaps in white sameness we discover an uncanny solace, that we are not isolated instances but part of something endless, repeating, neither beginning nor ending. Still, the question lingers, what happens to memory in a world where entropy smooths every distinction? We know that rocks can preserve scars of glaciers, ice can preserve whispers of air, but when horizons all blend into one, does recollection disintegrate too? Maybe this is why we cling so tightly to difference, to warmth against cold, to voices against silence. Because entropy is always waiting to smooth us back into horizon, to erase our sharp edges into the calm of repetition. And yet, if entropy stretches the world into pale repetition, dissolving identity across horizons of white, what happens when something interrupts, when dust falls upon the snow, when fragments of distant places settle upon the blankness and momentarily disrupt the silence? For even in the stillest landscapes, dust arrives, carried by winds that do not respect distance, born of deserts, of dry seas, of eroded mountains. It drifts across the skin of the world until it rests softly upon frost. Against the infinity of white, a veil of brown, of gray, of ochre appears, a reminder that sameness is never absolute, that even entropy cannot resist interruption. To bend down and study this dust is to glimpse the quiet interconnectedness of Earth. Inside a single grain may lie fragments of quartz eroded from mountains hundreds of miles away, or spores lifted from lost forests, or the tiny, invisible remains of once living things that drifted across oceans before being caught in a storm. Sometimes even salt from ancient seas finds its way into polar ice, a piece of vanished water written into frozen sky. Could it be that dust is the handwriting of elsewhere, carried into silence to remind frozen landscapes that they are not alone, that memory is always wider than place? Scientists know these layers well. In cores drawn from Greenland or Antarctica, faint lines of darker ice reveal ancient storms. Dust particles archived between pristine sheets of white tell of droughts, of deserts expanding and contracting, of forests burning as climates shifted. Even volcanic eruptions thousands of miles away left ash that arrived eventually, falling as a thin seam only a few millimeters across, yet visible millions of years later. In such fragile clues, the world admits its interconnectedness. Oceans talking to glaciers, deserts speaking to tundras, fire carried to frost. Maybe dust is the world reminding itself of continuity, that no horizon is ever truly isolated. Philosophically, there is something tender about these dustfalls. Snow is the language of silence, but dust is interruption, a quiet reminder that memory is fragile and easily rewritten. A horizon of white becomes a page, and each storm another sentence scattered upon it. Dust does not stay where it falls. It shifts, it drifts, it accumulates into new shapes. In this shifting lie traces of impermanence, of identity itself scattering into foreign ground. Could it be that dust is the perfect metaphor for memory? Weightless, mobile, prone to erasure, yet persistent enough to settle again elsewhere? These deposits also bring nourishment. In modern times we know that dust from the Sahara fertilizes the Amazon rainforest, delivering minerals eroded from ancient seabeds to fuel distant life. So it may have been in ages of ice, deserts stripped of soil provided iron, phosphorus, and calcium to glacial plains, seeding oceans with nutrients necessary for plankton blooms. Dust carried from deathly drought sustained life across frozen seas. That strange reciprocity haunts the thought. What withers in one place can breathe life in another, even if carried only as faint powder upon winds. Perhaps this has always been Earth's secret, that loss and survival are not separate, but shared across distance by invisible messengers. And yet dust is also a reminder of decay. Every particle is the fragment of something broken down. A mountain worn into grains, a forest burned into soot, a stone collapsed into powder. Entropy is always implied in its presence. the constant sanding of the earth, the endless disintegration of form. Dust is the body of memory undone. But in its undoing, it preserves fragments indefinitely, reshuffling them across the globe. Could it be that memory itself survives only in this way? Broken, scattered, never whole, but present regardless in the drift of countless pieces? To walk across a snowfield tinged with dust is to be reminded that purity is illusion. The whiteness of ice is always marked by some intrusion. A stray grain, a forgotten spore, a chemical trace. The world writes itself even where it seems empty. Perhaps that is the lesson of dust, that absence is never complete, and silence never absolute. Even the quietest plain finds itself rewritten, if only by a breath of wind carrying echoes from deserts far away. And yet, if dust can drift endlessly into frozen silence, rewriting memory with fragments of distant worlds, what then of the hidden places beneath the snow, the caverns where the hush of frost is broken not by wind, but by warmth rising secretly from the earth itself? For deep beneath the frozen crust, in fault lines and fissures, in caves where steam condenses on rock like the breath of a sleeping animal, the planet keeps small refuges of heat. Silence may dominate the surface, but in these clandestine spaces, life whispers differently. These geothermal sanctuaries are not grand cathedrals of light. They are narrow corridors, dripping walls, chambers steamed and damp, their ceilings sometimes lined with mineral deposits like ancient chandeliers. The warmth here does not roar. It seeps, patient and subtle, a reminder that long after the sun withdraws, the Earth's heart continues to pulse. And in that pulse, microbial life endures. Picture it. Colonies of extremophiles clinging to the walls, bacteria slow but steady, feeding on sulfur, iron, carbon dioxide, reshaping chemistry at scales invisible to the eye. Could it be that these small lives, nearly forgotten, are the true authors of survival, writing endurance into places where no other voice could reach? Science tells us that wherever there is water, minerals, and heat, life finds a foothold. Even here, under kilometers of ice, geothermal energy fuels tiny ecosystems. Streams of melt trickle in, carrying dust and spores, stirring the chemical soup. Vent gases in rich concentrations just enough for energy exchange. The organisms here do not thrive in abundance, but they persist. And in persistence lies another kind of strength, not the loudness of dominance, but the quiet refusal to disappear. Perhaps this is what Earth demonstrates over and over again. Life need not be abundant to be eternal. Some speculate that in times of global ice, these caves were sanctuaries for genetic seeds that later spread outward again when thaw returned. Like small embers held beneath ash, they smoldered in their rocky shelters, waiting until conditions allowed for bloom. If this is true, then hidden beneath vast silence is not only survival but continuity, the living thread keeping possibility alive across epochs of frost. Could it be that the story of life is not in the vast forests or oceans, but in these small sanctuaries of heat, protecting survival until it could emerge again? When we imagine the possibility of life on distant planets, Mars buried under dust, Europa sealed by icy oceans, Enceladus with its plumes of vapor, we look for analogs here on Earth. And we find them in these caves, where warmth presses gently against cold, and microbes endure without sunlight. If life can survive in these hidden pockets, is it possible it could survive there too, waiting in quiet spaces where fire and frost meet in uneasy truce? Perhaps caves on distant worlds are not simply voids, but refuges, breathing silently as ours once did. But even as we explore these ideas, something more philosophical rises with the steam. What if heat itself is memory? Beneath the crust, warmth is the residue of radioactivity, of collisions, of accretion stretching back billions of years. Each cave of heat is fueled by energy that has been traveling upward since the very beginning, since molten Earth first cooled. In that sense, microbial life dwelling in these refuges is not merely living in the present. It is living against the very heartbeat of planetary history, feeding on the whisper of creation that has never quite gone out. Entropy touches even here. Microbes die as they live, leaving films of organic residue that solidify on stone. Minerals are altered by metabolic traces. Over millennia, these chemical fossils act as signatures, the evidence of small, patient communities. The caves themselves become diaries, not in paper but in altered chemistry, not in fossils of bone but in scars of minerals. Could it be that when we look back across deep time, some of the most important fossils we find will not be bones or shells, but the chemical echoes left behind by organisms that persisted where no others would? To descend into these geothermal pockets is to witness resilience written in simplicity. Not because complexity wins, but because stillness does. Not because abundance thrives, but because persistence endures. Maybe the future of survival is not in the species that dominate, but in the ones that hide, waiting quietly for the planet to remember warmth again. And yet, if hidden caves can carry life across frozen ages, what of us? What would humanity look like if pressed against the same silence, forced into survival not by thriving outward, but by retreating inward, shaping entire cultures at the very edge of frost? To imagine it is to begin erasing the landscapes we know, the fertile valleys, the rivers that open wide to warm seas, the infinite greens of summers that once allowed our ancestors to wander. If Earth had been locked in a perpetual winter, our story might have unfolded differently, our identity sculpted not by warmth, but by endless snow. Picture scattered clusters of villages lit not by sun-drenched harvests but by trembling firelight etched into walls of ice. Communities clustered beneath cavern roofs carved by survival, their structures not built from wood but carved directly into glaciers. Rooms hollowed out of frost that glowed faintly blue when torches burned within. Architecture would not rise upward, but dig inward, shaped by necessity and patience, carried from fire to frost, only to refreeze into something resembling permanence. Could it be that under endless winter, we would have become less builders of monuments to last eternity and more sculptors of impermanence, content to let home and shelter melt, reform, collapse, and be carved again, as cycles of cold dictate? Food would arrive not by abundance but by ingenuity. Oceans sealed in ice would still give their breath beneath the lid, and humans, clever and restless, would find the small cracks, the thermal vents, the hidden colonies of fish. Our hands might have learned to shape tools almost entirely of bone and ice, our diets a patchwork of survival foods. Lichen scraped from stone, algae drawn from geothermal springs, roots kept alive in warmth trapped close to underground heat. Fire itself would no longer be luxury but law, its memory passed like sacred script from one generation to the next. It would not be kindling and flame we revered most, but continuity, making sure the last coal never flickered to ash. Perhaps even our rituals would grow from such necessity. Whole ceremonies around fire, around warmth, around the precious color red as it broke against the monotone of white. Children might have grown up never truly knowing green, their imagination of leaves and forests carried like myth rather than fact. Could it be that our sense of beauty, of wonder, of longing itself would have been shaped by absence rather than abundance? That color and warmth, experienced rarely, would have been treated like glimpses of eternity, more profound than any constant supply could grant? Science lends weight to these thoughts. During our actual ice ages, humans clustered into marginal zones where grasslands still opened, or seas offered resources from exposed shores. Fossilized hearths, bones marked with cutting tools, ancient huts made of mammoth tusks, all suggest our species has always known how to adapt when cold pressed hard. But if there had never been relief, never a summer between winters, then adaptation itself might not have been temporary. It might have been our permanent mold. Perhaps our languages would have evolved to carry more words for snow, for silence, for shadow. Perhaps memory itself would have found ways to crystallize differently, emphasizing endurance and caution over expansion and abundance. Maybe civilization itself would look less like cities and more like flames circling in ice. And yet, there is something to wonder here. Under endless winter, would we have become more communal? Family bonds welded not by luxury but by shared survival. Every hand required. Every voice a part of keeping fire alive. Silence filled not by solitude but by group. Or might scarcity have sharpened us in other ways? Competition, boundaries, suspicion over dwindling supplies? Which vision rings truer? That endless cold drives us inward toward compassion, or inward toward bitterness. Could it be that humanity under frost contains both gentleness by fire, hardness upon the snowfields? If human art had grown in this frozen world, its materials would be transient. Carvings made from ice walls, glowing sculptures that could only last as long as temperature kept them intact. Paintings etched in mineral soot upon cave frost, shadows of memory erased when warmth briefly touched them. Fossils of imagination erased again and again, leaving no trace unless sealed accidentally in ice long deep. What is art if impermanence is guaranteed? Perhaps it becomes a performance, a ritual of creation rather than preservation. A song sung not for future memory, but simply to test and celebrate the fact of endurance in the present moment. In such a world, memory itself may grow different. It may not be externalized into paper or stone, but woven into ritual, into song, into repetition of story around fire. The only memory that lasts would be human memory, fragile and breakable, but kept alive by voices echoing into dark caverns. Perhaps our great libraries in this timeline would not be halls of shelves but the glow of human mouths repeating, carrying, refusing to let silence win. Could it be that memory itself is stronger when it is always under threat? And here a curious thought lingers. Humanity, under endless winter, might never strive for expansion of empire, but for preservation of continuance. Not because ambition lacks, but because survival is already a task abundant enough. Maybe our true civilization would not have risen as sprawling cities, but as subtle cultures of fire, scattered but eternal, each gathering reminding the snow that it did not win, that something warm still moved among it. What if identity itself would be less about what we build, and more about what we protect, what fragile thread we refuse to let go? And yet, if humanity at the edge could survive by fire, if we could sculpt our memory against snow and silence, then what of the dreams of warmth themselves, the longing for sunlight, rivers, for colors outside of white and blue? Perhaps, in a world bound forever by winter, we would remember warmth not as something daily or ordinary, but as a story passed from voice to voice, a memory loosening into legend. Summers would exist only in fragments, half-believed tales of green rivers, of leaves warm to the touch, of skies painted not in pale light but in burning gold. Around the fire, children might hear of a sun that once blazed stronger than the faint disk suspended over the frozen horizon. They might imagine it not as a ball of plasma but as a kind of god, a living flame that warmed oceans, coaxed flowers upward, filled the air with sound. But for them, the memory would be so far away it would resist translation. Could it be that forgotten summers would transform into myth, retold not as history but as longing made sacred? Science offers an echo of this idea. Memory is not only cultural, not only in stories, it is physical, it is biological. We carry faint traces of ancient climates within us, inscribed in the shape of our bodies, in the way our metabolisms adapt, in the ratios of isotopes that record where our ancestors lived and breathed. DNA remembers droughts, remembers abundance, remembers the slow touch of warmth. In a perpetual ice age world, perhaps those genetic whispers would remain, dormant but pulsing, reminding us of something we had never seen ourselves. Is it possible that longing itself is inherited, encoded inside us by epochs our conscious minds have long since forgotten? Imagine what dreams might look like in such a world. We would close our eyes in frozen huts, wrapped in furs, and our sleeping visions would light with colors our waking eyes had never known. Yellows bursting like sparks, greens stretching infinitely, reds full and soft, ancestral fragments slipping into dream. Could it be that dreams themselves are the only way we would keep hold of warmth, unconscious memory slipping through generations? Perhaps the experience of summer, when erased by reality, would continue only in the theater of sleep. And in the silence of endless winter, these dreams might begin to feel more true than waking life, more vivid than the monotone days. Archaeology whispers that longing has always threaded itself through humanity. Cave paintings do not only show what was necessary to survive. They show abundance, movement, color. They show not just the world outside but the world desired. What if endless winter would draw art inward not to depict animals or landscapes, but to hold on to a lost sun, a river that won't thaw? Perhaps each generation would remake the myth, painting circles of glowing pigment, describing skies beyond the frozen one above. Memory turning into story, story into ritual, ritual into identity. Not because summer was real, at least for them, but because hope was necessary. And yet, under such ice, how strong would nostalgia become once detached from direct experience? Would it melt into faint myth, whispers told but not believed, or sharpen into the deepest longing of human imagination? Could summer become the afterlife of a frozen culture, the paradise always promised but never touched? Perhaps children would be told that after death, one walks into warmth at last, rivers unfrozen, fields alive, silence broken by cicadas. Could humanity, reshaped by frost, invent eternity as a replica of something its ancestors once lived vividly but it could now only remember as dream? Even now, fossil isotopes and pollen grains remind us of forgotten summers, warmer ages before glaciations, when forests ranged further, when rivers carved differently. The planet carries their records not in stories but in chemistry, in dust and oxygen ratios and scattered fragments of bloom. Perhaps the Earth itself dreams through ice, preserving in silence what it too remembers, waiting for warmth to return. And so the thought lingers quietly. Maybe summers are never truly lost. Maybe they live in layers beneath ice, in the chemistry of fossils, in the instinctual longings of creatures shaped by warmth. Memory, cultural and genetic, coiling downward through us like roots stretching for a sun they still crave even in shadow. And yet, if myth itself can be seeded by memory, if even sunlight can turn into legend carried across lifetimes, then what vision might rise when we see the whole planet from afar? A blue fossil shining in stillness, wrapped in ice, holding within it both the truths and the myths of what it once was. From orbit, Earth would no longer appear as the restless, swirling planet we know. Its clouds would still move, its seas would still breathe beneath ice, but the surface, clad in endless white, would look carved rather than alive, sculpted rather than fluid. To distant eyes, it would resemble not a world in motion, but a fossil of a world, a frozen relic caught between breath and silence. Imagine staring down as continents blur, their edges softened beneath glaciers that stretch into the sea, coastlines reshaped, mountains rounded under frost. The blue of oceans, once vivid, lies dulled beneath polished shells of ice, reflecting light upward like glass. Earth gleams not as a spinning landscape, but as a jewel of uncanny stillness, its surface crystalline, its memory bound in pale silence. Could it be that a frozen Earth is the closest our living planet can ever come to appearing dead? And yet, paradoxically, this very deathly mask preserves within it the archives of life. Scientists who model such planetary conditions sometimes describe Earth as a snowball planet, a state where nearly all surfaces are locked beneath ice. Geological evidence suggests this has happened before, deep in the Proterozoic Eon, when continents drifted closer to the equator and glaciers spread outward from the poles until even tropics froze. Life survived then only in tiny refuges of heat, clinging along hydrothermal vents and melt pockets. And yet, from space, Earth would have seemed serene, even perfect, every surface polished by frost. What is a planet viewed through cosmic eyes, if not its own fossil, a record of its state preserved in light and shape for anyone passing to see? Perhaps this is the strangest paradox. That to us, ice is silence, stillness, even death, but to the cosmos, it makes Earth shine. The reflectivity of ice, its albedo, bounces sunlight outward, amplifying the brightness of our planet until it becomes visible from greater distances. A frozen world announces itself more clearly to other eyes. Could it be that, in being silenced, Earth would in fact speak louder to the stars, shimmering as a pale fossil jewel traveling through the dark? Philosophically, the image is unsettling and comforting at once. To be fossilized is usually to lose motion, to become relic. Yet planets move on scales that disregard our definition of life or stasis. Even if Earth were covered edge to edge in frost, its tectonic plates would keep drifting quietly. Volcanoes would still erupt beneath glaciers. Entropy would still unspool. Dust from stars would still fall upon its atmosphere. It is only from far away that it would seem inert, fossilized, eternal. Up close, it would remain restless, memory continuing beneath the mask. Maybe stillness and change are never opposites, but two ways of perceiving the same thing, depending on your distance from it. And there, as one looks at this imagined Earth from orbit, comes the sense that fossils are not only bones but planets, not only shells pressed into rock but entire worlds pressed into silence. Seeing Earth as a frozen sculpture is to realize that memory does not scale with size. It exists equally in small shells and in planetary atmospheres, equally in whispers of dust and in moving continents. Ice frames them all, presenting a moment of planetary being as though it were carved, prepared for eternity, while in truth nothing is still for long. And yet, another wondering stirs. If Earth, in such a frozen state, appeared as a fossil from above, then what of the processes within it? What happens in the cycles beneath that mask, in the oceans whispering still, in the carbon exchange halted, in the carbon frozen, in the entropy waiting patiently for its next move? What deeper truths can be read from the collapse of rhythm itself? What story unfolds when the very breath of a planet slows almost to silence? And yet, if Earth, in such a frozen state, appeared as a fossil from above, then what of the invisible currents within it? What happens in the dark chemistry beneath that mask, in the oceans beneath the lid of ice, in the forests reduced to lichen, in the breath of the planet itself as cycles begin to shudder under the weight of endless frost? For life depends upon the carbon cycle, the great exchange of gas between air, water, stone, and living things. And in perpetual cold, this cycle falters. It does not end entirely, but it slows, stumbles, collapses into silence, as if Earth holds its breath and forgets to exhale. Under warmth, carbon moves constantly. Plants draw it from the air to grow. Animals release it back in every breath. Oceans absorb and return it through steady exchange. In warmth, carbon flows endlessly, feeding ecosystems and climate alike. But ice interrupts. Photosynthesis fades as forests vanish, grasses retreat, oceans seal beneath frozen ceilings. What once was a cycle becomes sequestration. Carbon disappears not into breath but into entrapment, falling into oceans that can no longer communicate with the sky, locked in permafrost soils that refuse to thaw, buried deep in peat never allowed to decay. Could it be that endless frost transforms Earth into a vault, holding not memory now, but potential carbon frozen as possibility, paused beyond reach? Scientists find evidence of this in isotopic markers, in the ratios of carbon-12 to carbon-13 written into carbonate rocks, in organic deposits layered beneath ice. These ratios whisper of epochs when biological activity nearly ceased, when carbon was no longer exchanged freely but instead stored, trapped, forgotten. To read such records is to glimpse a suffocated breath cycle, the lungs of the planet pressed shut by cold. Perhaps in these ancient frozen times, Earth itself seemed to inhale and then pause, a pause not measured in seconds but in millions of years, a geologic breath held across epochs. But what does it mean when a planet forgets its breath? Without carbon circulation, feedbacks collapse. Weathering, the slow dissolution of rock that balances climate, weakens under frost. Soil microbes, the tiny engineers of respiration, fall into dormancy. Even the burial of organic matter into ocean floors halts as ice lids prevent circulation. Carbon's rhythm stalls, and with its stalling comes not only silence but fragility. The system waits on a knife edge, unable to correct itself, accumulating imbalance like dust across centuries. Could it be that climate itself, usually alive with cycles, slips into coma during such times? Maybe the collapse of carbon's motion is the nearest Earth comes to resembling death. And still there is paradox, because while frozen carbon signals collapse, it also signals preservation. What is locked away does not vanish. Peat-rich in ancient plant matter sleeps beneath ice, waiting for warmth to return. Oceans sit heavy, storing dissolved carbon until melt releases it again. The cycle may collapse, yet only into suspension. Perhaps we misunderstand collapse, confusing it with erasure. What if collapse is simply another form of memory, a preservation by waiting, a cycle resting until conditions allow its lines to continue? There is unease in this thought, too, for thaw eventually restores what was trapped. The breath held is released all at once, and carbon surges again into the atmosphere with force. Scientists warn of this today, in the whispers of permafrost melt, of methane bubbling from lakes, of feedbacks reigniting after long dormancy. Past glaciations may have ended not with gentle transitions, but with sudden atmospheric shifts, ancient pulses of carbon exhaled after eons of silence. Perhaps in that exhalation, the line between survival and extinction thinned dramatically. Maybe every thaw has been as dangerous as the freeze it replaced. And there, looking across deep time, arises a philosophical question. If carbon is life's breath, then is its silence death? Or is it memory only disguised as stillness? Could collapse itself be a necessary pause, a resetting of the system, a way the earth gathers itself for the next rhythm? Maybe collapse is not the end of the story, but the space between notes, the echo stretched out until the planet is ready to breathe again. Even now, in the frozen soils of Siberia, in the strata of Greenland's ice, in the sediments of ocean depths, carbon records wait, quietly speaking when we choose to listen. Fossil leaves compressed in stone still hold black shadows of what once drew carbon from the sky. Ancient atmospheres puff out of ice cores, carrying ratios that remind us how long the Earth can wait. Is it possible that the collapse of cycles is not warning of absence, but testimony of resilience? That even in stillness, even in silence, the system continues, simply in another form? And yet, if carbon itself can be paused, if the planet's very breath can be suspended for millions of years within frost, what then of fragile forms beneath it? What stories unfold in delicate patterns, in crystals repeating endlessly, in snowflakes that build and dissolve? A shattered symmetry that holds the trace of something both temporary and eternal. For every snowfall is a momentary archive, a billion tiny structures drifting downward, each one unique, each one carrying within it the mystery of repetition that never becomes sameness. To look closely at a snowflake is to feel time collapsing into geometry. 6 arms radiate outward, delicate and exact, yet no two are alike. Temperature, pressure, humidity, all conspire to shape subtle differences, so that while each flake obeys the law of symmetry, each flake also refuses to be a copy. Could it be that snow is the perfect metaphor for existence itself, bound by rules, yet chaotic in outcomes, fragile yet infinite in variety, temporary yet eternal in recurrence? And there is something haunting in their impermanence. A snowflake can last seconds upon the palm, disappear within breaths, yet multiplied beyond imagining. They build glaciers, they bury continents, they preserve atmospheres for ages. The instant flicker becomes the geologic archive, not because flakes endure, but because they repeat. Maybe the world itself functions in this way, not through permanence but through endless reiteration, each crystal dissolving but leaving behind a pattern carried forward through the whole. Science observes that crystals are time embodied. The molecular structure of ice arranges water into precise angles, tiny moments of order in a universe moving steadily toward disorder. Entropy one day will scatter everything, and yet, along the way, it produces symmetry, brief flashes of perfection, repeating and fracturing into infinite variations. Could it be that life itself rises from this contradiction, that we, like crystals, owe our being to structures that form and dissolve endlessly, never lasting, but always returning? Snowflakes, when caught in frozen soils or deep ice layers, become fossils of weather. Their trapped isotopes reflect the chemistry of ancient air, while their shape records the path they took through atmosphere. In their silent descent, they are archivists of forgotten skies. Whole epochs of wind and cold, storms and stillness, are held in their brief, crystalline forms. When we drill into ice cores today and read their trapped traces, we are in truth listening to snowflakes, whispers of a sky that once drifted gently onto an earth no longer here. Philosophically, the thought unsettles and comforts all at once. That the most fragile shapes, capable of disappearing with a single touch, are also the building blocks of landscapes vast and eternal. A glacier is nothing more than an accumulation of impermanence. A continent of silence built from instants of soundless dissolution. Could it be that the universe, too, is like this grandness constructed from repetition, permanence built not from the indestructible, but from the endlessly fragile? Maybe nothing is ever meant to last, except the pattern of return. As we picture one snowflake dissolving upon contact with warm skin, we might recall how many billions fall unseen, how many stack quietly into drifts that survive centuries. And when they compress, when weight transforms them into glacial ice, their individuality vanishes. Uniqueness erased by pressure, stitched into something larger. Perhaps this too mirrors us. The single is fragile, temporary, dissolving. The collective preserves, presses forward. Could it be that we, like crystals, exist both as unique patterns and as fragments destined to blend into something beyond ourselves? Snow's shattered symmetry reminds us that repetition is never perfect, that even in its rule-bound structure, the universe insists on difference. This insistence creates beauty, but it also prevents us from ever holding permanence. Every flake is both archive and disappearance, both form and dissolution. To rest with this reality is to accept that existence is always half-formed, half-lost, a fractal frozen mid-repetition. Maybe this is the only eternity we are given, the endless variety of impermanence. And yet, if crystals themselves can dissolve to form something larger, if snowflakes can vanish only to build glaciers, then what of those moments when ice preserves not pattern but absence? When life itself, fragile as snow, ends not with fire, but with frost, leaving behind extinctions so silent they seem to halt time entirely? For we so often imagine extinction as loud, as cataclysmic. A burst of volcanic fury, an asteroid collision, a sudden collapse in flame. But here, in the grip of endless ice, extinction becomes slow. It creeps, it starves, it silences, until what remains is absence stretched over centuries. Imagine an animal, its herds once vast, its range once broad, wandering further each year into landscapes steadily stripped of food, grasslands swallowed by frost, rivers sealed into white silence, predators thinned as prey dwindles, prey thinned as plants vanish. There is no single moment of catastrophe here, no single boundary line. There is only attrition, hunger spreading like an invisible shadow, pressing entire species into ghosthood across generations. The film does not explode. It simply slows, frame by frame, until it becomes still, each last breath preserved like frost arrested on a windowpane. The fossil record bears witness to extinctions like this. Bones left in permafrost, bodies preserved not by stone but by cold, reveal malnourishment in their very marrow. Isotopic analysis of tooth enamel whispers of diets narrowed to last options. The faint trace of lichen, the mineral residue of bark, the fragments of desperation. These signals tell us that extinction here was not instant but incremental, each individual forced closer to scarcity until lineage itself dissolved. Could it be that, in a frozen world, extinction is not an event but an era? A long quiet undoing that stretches until memory cannot mark the precise moment it happened? There is an eeriness to such silence. For in cataclysmic endings, there is at least a point of rupture. But in frozen extinctions, the line between living and vanished blurs. Whole species linger in twilight, their final centuries more ghostly than vital, as though entropy itself is feeding upon them slowly, invisibly, patiently. Perhaps that is why ice feels like an elegy. It keeps the body, but not the spark. It preserves memory, but not continuation. Life frozen long enough becomes paradox, present in form, absent in motion. In this way, ice archives not only existence but erasure, showing us that loss too has a shape. Science reveals that glacial periods are punctuated by extinctions both vast and subtle. Creatures ill-suited to scarcity, giant ground sloths, saber-tooths, mammoths, mastodons, disappear gradually as ecosystems shift beneath them. Even plants vanish quietly from pollen records, once abundant grains dwindling until they are gone entirely, replaced by the sparse remains of tundra flora. Atmospheric change ties into this story as well. Carbon locked away within ice weakens plant growth, the collapse of vegetation echoing upward into everything dependent on it. Extinction becomes systemic here, not isolated, a chain reaction slowed by frost. And yet, extinction in slow motion is not only ecological but philosophical. What does it mean, after all, for something to be lost so gradually? We are creatures who grasp events, who name beginnings and endings so we can remember them. But when the vanishing is so faint, when it takes millennia, how is memory itself to hold it? Entire epics of disappearance have slipped beyond human story because they lack spectacle. Perhaps this is the most haunting truth of cold-driven loss, that it erases not only species but their very farewell, their memory dissipating into silence before we even know how to grieve. Still, there is mystery in what ice keeps. Bodies sealed in frost reappear as though no time has passed. A mammoth emerges, hair intact, stomach contents still preserved, its features frozen mid-expression. Extinct yet still present. Iconic yet already lost. What are we to make of such paradox? Could it be that ice refuses to let extinction complete itself, pausing the moment endlessly, holding beings in an unfinished state between presence and absence? Maybe extinction in the cold is forever half done. This thought carries us into strange wonderings. If the film of extinction slows and pauses under ice, then could there have been chapters of life we simply never saw, preserved too perfectly for memory to release them? Hidden DNA in permafrost soils already whispers of organisms unseen in the fossil record. Leaves that never became stone, microbes that persisted only invisibly. Perhaps every extinction hides a counterstory. Survival we do not know, or persistence in archives we have not opened. Is extinction ever final, if fragments remain frozen deep below, waiting? And yet, if silence can preserve even extinction, if whole moments of erasure can be paused within ice, then what happens when the remnants of us too, our tools, our plastics, our metals, are sealed within frost, becoming technofossils of a species preserved not in myth but in debris, evidence of a civilization caught in the same frozen pause? For just as mammoths wait in permafrost, their fur still intact, so too might fragments of us endure. Our bottles, our ruins, our signal in quiet materials not meant to return to dust. Imagine a frozen plain where glaciers retreat centuries from now, spilling out artifacts they have carried like reluctant archivists. A glass bottle glints faintly under low light. A shard of steel, rust slowed by ice, surfaces with strange resilience. Even fragments of plastic, light, unyielding, emerge unchanged, their colors vivid against the monotone of old snow. Could it be that the deepest memory of our age will not be the stories we write, but the polymers we created, chemistries not known in any epoch before us, substances destined to outlast even our language? Scientists already name them. Technofossils, traces of human presence pressed into the geological record. Plastics embedded into sediments. Concrete hardened into unexpected stone. Aluminium, once rare in nature, now scattered as confetti through oceans, soils, and sky. In permafrost, these things are slowed even further, insulated from decay, preserved as piquant signals of a species that reshaped a planet not only with breath but with invention. When future layers are analyzed, whether by us or by another intelligence, the lines of our epoch will stand out in chemical clarity. Unnatural isotopes, synthetic resins, altered minerals. Our memory written not in genomes or fossils, but in trash. Philosophically, the image unsettles. For once, humans dreamed of monuments to permanence. Stone temples, metal towers, inscriptions carved to withstand centuries. And yet, what endures most effortlessly is waste, the unintended relics of our making. Could it be that our legacy, sealed in frost, is less about what we revered and more about what we discarded? Maybe the earth remembers us most vividly not through our intentions, but through our accidents. Picture the permafrost like a library whose shelves are filled half with bones and half with artifacts. In one layer lies a mammoth tusk, spiral curling into silence. Nearby, a shard of circuit board, copper still gleaming. In another lies pollen from vanished forests, mingled with microfibers of synthetic cloth. This juxtaposition blurs the line between natural and artificial, between fossil and fabric, between history and refuse. Perhaps this is the truest fossilization of us, the blending of our remnants with everything else, no separation possible. And yet, deep time treats all equally. Given long enough, mountains erode, seas shift, continents split. Our artifacts, however enduring, will also be drawn into motion, subducted by tectonic plates, folded into mantle, their isotopes scattered into future surfaces we cannot imagine. Even plastic, unyielding to biology, will one day decay under the infinite patience of the planet. But preserved in perpetual frost, paused in conditions that resist entropy, they will last long enough to speak to eras far beyond us. Maybe not as voices, but as shadows, echoes of a species that once stirred the air so radically its presence became undeniable in every archive of Earth's memory. Some archaeologists suggest this is not only possibility but inevitability. The technosphere, as they call it, already merges with geology. Our debris is becoming strata. Even in present ice cores, polymers are detected, snow falling over them, sealing in signal like any layer of ash or dust. Future scientists, if any, will not struggle to locate us in Earth's record. We will be glaringly obvious, sharp signatures written not delicately but in bold, in plastics and combustion, in radioactive markers scattered after brief centuries of atomic fire. We think of ourselves as fragile, but our signature is not fragile at all. It is loud, bright, and unavoidable, even buried in silence. And so the thought returns, what if a distant intelligence one day reads these frozen archives? Would they see us as mythic, a civilization halfway between geology and technology, our ruins straddling the line between fossil and design? Our message, carried unwittingly, might not be the poetry of our speech but the stubbornness of our materials. Perhaps, to them, we would be remembered as the civilization of plastic and glass, the people who changed the air, the ones who wrote their existence into polymers durable enough to resist the cold. But what memory would that be, truly? Would it carry nuance, emotion, story? Or only fragments, only debris, only suggestion? Technofossils may preserve our hands, but not our voices, our choices, but not our reasons. Maybe our eternal myth, left to the silence of frost, will be interpreted not as grandeur but as puzzle. A half-erased script pointing to life that once was loud, but left itself remembered mostly by fragments of things it tried and failed to throw away. And yet, if our age too becomes fossilized in frost, traced by metals, plastics, and forgotten ruins, then what of the continents themselves? For the surface may freeze, silenced in white stillness, yet beneath the mask of frost, the planet does not rest. Continents drift regardless. Slow, patient, unstoppable. Mountains swell upward where forces press. Oceans narrow where plates converge. Trenches deepen where one crust sinks below another. The Earth, though outwardly asleep, shifts silently beneath the weight of infinite snow. From space, a world covered in ice might look immobile, as if locked into one frozen shape forever. But deep beneath, convection currents continue in the mantle. Heat rises in plumes. Basalt flows form where rifts tear continents quietly apart. Even in coldest epochs, tectonics do not pause. They are the restless heart of the planet, moving at rates we barely feel, centimeters a year, but stretched over millions of years, continental fragments reassemble, drift into new collisions, new alignments. Could it be that ice is not permanence, but disguise, a veiling mask hiding a geology that never stops reconfiguring itself? Scientifically, deep time records tell us this is true. Geological cores drilled through both polar regions reveal mountain roots buried in ice, forgotten ridgelines smothered since before human thought existed. Beneath Antarctica lies the Gamburtsev Mountains, hidden peaks as tall as the Alps, entombed in miles of glacial crust. There, ancient landscapes remain untouched, shielded from erosion by the ice above them. Mountains we may never see still rise and fracture. Valleys we cannot walk still lie carved and quiet. Could it be that glaciers preserve not only history above, but also whole geographies below, shielding them until some distant thaw reveals them again. Imagine the paradox. A mountain range might be older than civilization itself, still growing, still shifting, but covered so thoroughly that from above, it appears featureless, just another curve in a sheet of white. An entire ocean trench may widen unseen, water sealing and resealing under ice shelves. Time itself works invisibly here, pressing forward beneath the silence of frost. Perhaps this is what makes ice so mysterious. It captures us in illusion, suggesting stillness where there is only hidden turbulence. The world beneath is never quiet. We may wonder if extinction was ever final, if civilizations were ever truly erased. For as plates drift, they also recycle the past into future. Continents slide into subduction zones, carrying memory down into the mantle, where heat erases and remakes stone. Bones, forests, entire ocean floors vanish into this silence, re-emerging someday as volcanic gas or new crust draped upon the Earth's surface. Could it be that memory never truly disappears, but only changes form? Preserved in ice for a time, then taken downward into the furnace below, written again in mountains yet to rise? Entropy itself feels different when considered at this scale. Above ground, the ice smooths variation into sameness, horizons blurring endlessly. Below ground, tectonics drive complexity forward, folding, breaking, reworking the face of the planet. The cycle is endless. Ice masking motion, motion reshaping landscapes beneath ice. Maybe the dual truth of Earth is this. At every moment, silence exists only on the surface, while hidden beneath, change is constant. And so, when we imagine our own ruins buried in frost, the machinery of Earth promises there will come a time when ice retreats, when glaciers fold away, when mountains carried upward unveil what they once concealed. Even human technofossils, preserved in frozen stillness, may ride with drifting plates, slipping slowly toward trenches until they vanish into interior fire. Perhaps our legacy too is destined for subduction, erased not by entropy and silence, but by recycling under Earth's restless mantle. Could it be that deep time does not keep anything as permanent as we imagine, that every archive, even in ice, is only temporary storage for the geology beneath? And yet this thought is strangely comforting. For while we tend to measure value in permanence, perhaps the Earth values only motion. An eternal drift, a quiet unfolding of forms that never truly end but only transform. Ice conceals it, yes, but below, motion still persists, continents crossing landscapes of silence like ghosts walking patiently toward reunion. And yet, if land itself keeps moving, even unseen beneath frost, what then of our own minds, our sense of memory and time? Could consciousness behave like a glacier, slow and layered, pressing experience into strata too deep for us to recognize on the surface? Just as ice builds from countless snowfalls, each flake insignificant alone, yet monumental in accumulation, so memory builds from moments, each fleeting, compressing into something vast. At first, every memory is delicate as a crystal drifting downward. A flake of sound, a fragment of scent, a touch of light across the skin. They rest gently upon us, still distinct, still sharp. But with time, pressure begins. New moments fall upon the old, weight builds, and what was once fragile individuality blurs into depth. The crystal does not vanish. It becomes something else, pressed deeper into ice, hidden but not erased. Could it be that every layer of ourselves is preserved this way, held within but transformed by the weight of years? Science helps us imagine this. In glaciers, the upper layers are loose, snow still soft, details still visible. But further down the core, snow becomes firn, then firm ice, compressing all earlier fragments into dense translucence. The details blur, but the archive strengthens. In the same way, our earliest memories soften with time. No longer a clear moment but a presence, a feeling, compressed by the pressure of what has since fallen upon it. We forget some details, but perhaps forgetting is not absence. It is compression, the merging of flakes into the body of ice. And yet, if memory is glacial, then are we ourselves archives? Is the self not a solid structure, but a shifting, flowing river of ice, carrying the past forward beneath the surface of the present? Geologists remind us that glaciers, though they seem still, are always moving. Their layers flow, creep, stretch downward, sometimes fracturing, sometimes melting, sometimes refreezing further on. So too may memory slide beneath us, shaping identity in ways we do not see, moving slowly into new contexts, feeding valleys of thought, carving landscapes within us we only realize much later. Could it be that we are defined less by what we recall clearly and more by the slow, invisible presence of memory carried forward like ice beneath our feet? Philosophically, this perspective is both haunting and comforting. Haunting because it suggests that we never touch the full detail of ourselves, that what makes us who we are is hidden deep beneath layers, smoothed into indistinction. Comforting because it means that even what is forgotten is not gone. Everything remains somewhere within the glacier. Even if we cannot call it forth, it still moves with us, still presses forward as part of our flow. Perhaps our identity is larger than consciousness, an archive we only ever partly read. Consider too what happens when glaciers calve, when fragments break away into sea as icebergs. Could memory function the same? Whole pieces break off from the deep archive, drifting into awareness unexpectedly. The memory of a childhood scent, a voice carried into dream, a long-forgotten moment rising like a floating shard of ice into the present. These calvings are irregular, unpredictable, sometimes startling, yet they remind us that the glacier contains more than we habitually recognize. To live is to carry not only the surface of the now but the depths of everything layered beneath. Entropy works upon this structure as well. Just as glaciers melt from below, memory erodes quietly. Details drip away, leaving only broad contours. Whole decades may blur into a generalized atmosphere. Warmth, silence, hardship, but specifics dissolve. Yet erosion is not only loss. Meltwater from glaciers feeds rivers, carrying nutrients and minerals to life below. Perhaps erosion within memory also nourishes, turning rigid recollection into softer wisdom, carrying fragments that feed our present with fluid meaning. Maybe forgetting, like melting, is not absence but transformation, memory redistributed into flow. And yet, one more question lingers in this analogy. If identity is glacial, then where does it end? Glaciers often fuse together, joining flows, merging archives. Perhaps memory too is never solely individual. Our lives press against others, merge stories, carry each other's fragments forward. Identity shifts not only within the self but between selves. Could it be that humanity, too, is one vast glacier of shared memory, each of us a detail pressed into the collective flow of time? To think of this is to feel both small and infinite. Small because individuality is fragile within so much layering. Infinite because none of it is ever fully lost. The past flows forward with us, compressed, reshaped, waiting beneath the surface of the present. And yet, if our own minds can drift like glaciers, archives of memory always shifting beneath silence, then what happens when time stretches out to scales beyond us, when years fold into eons, and even stars seem to wait patiently above a frozen world, their light falling steadily upon ice that pays no urgency to record it? For while Earth enters its long winters, stars remain in their positions, burning silently, indifferent to the pause of frost below. Imagine standing on a white horizon, the frost unbroken, the air hushed by silence, and lifting your gaze upward. The stars would appear sharper than they do in warmth, for cold skies scatter less, the atmosphere calmer, clearer. The cosmos would look closer, more intimate, as though Earth in its frozen stillness had become a better window into infinity. Yet nothing above would change in rhythm. The constellations would still turn, the planets would still move, the moon would still rise. Even as ice silences Earth, the stars carry on unchanged, ancient witnesses unmoved by the difference between 1,000,000 years of forest or 1,000,000 years of snow. Could it be that to the cosmos, our ages of ice register only as brief inhales, while to us, they stretch beyond everything we know of life? Scientists remind us that starlight itself carries memory. To look at a star is to see the past. The light above us tonight came from centuries, millennia, even millions of years ago. Some stars we see no longer exist, their light still traveling across the vastness, though their fire has already gone out. Even as our planet freezes, we are illuminated by ghosts, celestial fossils made of light, arriving long after the source itself has ended. Isn't it strange that frozen Earth would be bathed not only in silence below but in the echoes of vanished suns above? Perhaps the weight of stars is not only patience but epitaph, recording what was already gone while telling us nothing of what is now. Time bends differently when measured by stars. An ice age, to us an eternity of hardship, to them is no more than a flicker. While glaciers crawl outward, carving continents over millions of years, a star like our sun remains steady, its fires continuing as if nothing of significance has passed. Stars live for billions of years. Ice ages live for millennia. Could it be that, from the cosmic perspective, the rise and fall of ice is as small as the breath of a single winter wind? And yet, for us, the difference is infinite. For humans, trapped in such an age, survival becomes mythology. Glacier by glacier, our lives bend to silence. For stars, they barely pause in their waiting. This dissonance reminds us that time is not absolute. It bends with scale, with perception, with distance. Maybe time is only ever a rhythm between things, slow for one, fast for another. Perhaps the very stars themselves teach us that eternity is always relative, that what feels endless to us is brief to them, and what feels like a blink to them is eternity to us. Philosophically, it is humbling to picture this. All that we are, our cities, our sciences, our comforts, occur within a few thousand years, flashes beneath stars who measure existence in billions. For them, we are not permanent. We are momentary drift. And yet, perhaps that is not diminishing but clarifying. Could it be that the stars teach us stillness not by ignoring us, but by reminding us that even silence has rhythm inside a larger cadence? Not because we matter less, but because our perception of forever is so fragile. Glaciers measure time through layers of snow. Stars measure time through fusion, light, and decay. Both preserve memory, but in scales far beyond us. And standing between them, we are caught, small creatures glimpsing both archives at once. Our world, frozen, is the diary of Earth. The stars, constant, are the diary of the universe. Perhaps our role is only to notice, to see both scales at once, and to wonder what it means that we can. And as we look upward on a world silenced by cold, another thought emerges. Starlight does not warm a frozen Earth. It shines, but the albedo of ice reflects much of it back, light sliding away instead of sinking in. The stars illuminate extinction, illuminate silence, illuminate stillness, but they cannot undo it. Their gift is not survival but visibility, not warmth but witness. What if this is their only role? Not to save, not to destroy, but simply to remain, watching long after our memory has vanished, patient as the frost spreading below. Maybe the patience of stars is not waiting at all. Maybe it is simply being, existing on scales that make the concept of waiting meaningless. What looks like waiting to us may be, to them, nothing but the present moment extended without end. Could it be that eternity itself is nothing more than a present stretched larger than we can comprehend, while we name it forever only because we cannot see its boundaries? And yet, if stars can outlast every frost, if they remain steady while Earth itself freezes and releases, then what does it mean to us within our fragility? What melts, and what truly remains, when eternity is measured not in lives but in light? And yet, if stars can outlast every frost, if they remain steady while Earth itself freezes and releases, then what does it mean to us within our fragility? What melts, and what truly remains, when eternity is measured not in lives but in light? To step onto a frozen landscape is to feel the paradox immediately. Everything seems permanent, locked, still. Yet even here, change whispers. Melt pools gather in shallow depressions. Crevasses stretch invisibly wider with each sigh of water. Structures that feel eternal shift under pressure, transforming quietly, subtly, forever. What melts first is often what is most fragile. A snowflake disappears in a breath of warmth. The smallest patterns vanish before the eye has time to memorize them. Layers pressed into ice for centuries can dissolve within days under thaw, history erased by a trickle. What changes first is detail, delicate ridges, surface signatures, the specific uniqueness of a flake, the fine etching in an ice core. And yet, the deeper layers, harder pressed, remain. Even in melting, there is hierarchy. Could it be this teaches us something about memory, that soft details falter, but deeper impressions refuse to vanish until long after? And still, not everything can be undone. Stone carried in ice, the erratics scattered across plains, remain long after glaciers pass. Dust entombed within ice layers can still be read when the surface has gone. Ancient gases remain trapped far beneath before they finally, inevitably, escape to air. Melting erases pieces, but never all. Each thaw uncovers something. 2. Old bones, hidden lakes, sediments that have slept untouched. In melting, archives vanish, but in melting, archives are also revealed. Could it be that what melts and what remains are not opposites, but stages of the same unfolding? Scientists know this cycle well. As ice margins retreat, they reveal landscapes preserved for thousands of years. Valleys scoured smooth, fossils of plants still intact, viruses down to molecular detail. Melt is both destruction and exhumation. It is entropy, but it is also unveiling. Philosophically, we may wonder if this is the deeper truth of transformation. Not that one state is lost while another endures, but that loss itself becomes a form of revelation. Maybe things are only ever gone in part. Part dissolves, part endures, part becomes something new entirely. And we, too, live inside this rhythm. Our identities melt and remain. Memories fade at the edges while deeper layers persist. Fragile details blur into cracks, but strong impressions stay. An emotion, a face, a silence too heavy to dissolve. What melts from us is small and shifting. What endures is transformed into sediment, shaping who we become long after detail is forgotten. Could it be that all lives function like glaciers in thaw, shedding what is unnecessary, holding what must endure, always in quiet rearrangement? Yet this transformation is not chaos. It is rhythm. In physics, ice melts not instantly but as energy tips balance. In geology, valleys emerge not suddenly but slowly upon thaw. Likewise in us, loss unfolds in rhythms, each part disappearing when it is time. What feels random in moments reveals pattern in hindsight. Perhaps melting itself is not destruction but movement, the inevitable passage of forms into new phases. Snow into water, memory into story, existence into echo, and yet the haunting remains. What if too much melts too quickly? Whole ice sheets collapsing, sea levels rising, records erased faster than they can be read. Whole memories, whole cultures thawing into nothing before their weight is carried forward. Melt on this scale is not only transformation, it is forgetting with no archive left behind. Perhaps this is the fragile balance Earth has always carried, to preserve enough to remember, but to melt enough to continue. And in every moment, what melts and what remains is a choice not made by us, but by time. Maybe that is why staring into cracks in ice feels both frightening and beautiful. Even in silence, change is inside everything, not because permanence fails, but because permanence was never real. The world is always speaking in transience. To stand upon this shifting ground is to realize that nothing is entirely lost, nothing is entirely kept. All things are held between melt and memory. And yet, if melting is always whispering at the edges, if nothing ever remains whole forever, then what of the ultimate horizon? What if frost itself never ends? What if the careful pauses of glaciation are not pauses at all, but permanence? What if Earth, once wrapped in silence, stays wrapped, forever turning beneath a cloak that does not forgive thaw? To imagine this is to let go of much we take for granted. Rivers never run freely to the sea. Forests never push upward toward light. Oceans lie locked beneath miles of lid, rocking with tides that no one can see. The seasons we know, spring thaw, summer bloom, autumn's dimming, winter's bite, all fade into one single prolonged moment. Not a cycle, not a rhythm, but a hush stretched infinite. Could it be that life itself, as we know it, is only possible because frost retreats, and that without retreat, existence contracts until only the smallest flickers remain? Science lends weight to the imagining. In Earth's prehistoric record, there are hints of this possibility. Snowball Earth, the Proterozoic ice ages, when glaciers may have stretched all the way to the equator. For tens of millions of years, our world may have been a white fossil in space, a jewel of frozen glass. The atmosphere still carried its oxygen, tectonics still pushed continents, volcanoes still breathed beneath the silence. But on the surface, cold reigned. Only in isolated sanctuaries of heat, hydrothermal vents, volcanic lakes, did life endure. Maybe, even then, Earth nearly chose silence forever. Maybe it was only carbon dioxide, slowly building from volcanic emissions under sealed skies, that brought thaw back into play. And what if such balance tipped differently? What if warmth had never returned? Philosophically, the thought is both terrifying and quieting. Terrifying, because it suggests permanence of absence. Quieting, because it holds something peaceful, too. A planet in endless frost is a planet no longer restless. No floods, no fires, no storms, only snow falling upon snow, a blanket renewed without friction. It is not destruction, but the smoothing of everything into stillness. Could it be that in endings, we long for such calm, even if it comes at the cost of motion? Maybe not because we desire silence, but because we are exhausted by noise. Yet even here, movement cannot be denied. Beneath the frost, continents still drift. Mountains still rise. Oceans, locked, hushed, still churn below. Entropy still works patiently in darkness, rearranging molecules even when no witness remains. If the frost never ends, then life becomes not impossible, but hidden, writing itself in caves, in vents, in isolated enclaves where warmth sneaks upward. Perhaps survival continues forever in miniature, unseen, uncelebrated. Could memory itself, carried in DNA, folded in spores, preserved in frost, represent another form of warmth? An ember no storm can extinguish, sleeping patiently until conditions change, or perhaps never changing at all, but persisting anyway. This is what makes the image haunting. The thought that Earth itself could become a living organism sustained only in whispers, its vast body silent, its breath shallow, yet still carrying a faint pulse. Just enough to linger, just enough to hold the idea of life without expression of abundance. Could it be that continuation, no matter how fragile, is all that has ever mattered in deep time? Not magnitude, not flourish, but persistence? And still there is us. What if the frost never ended while humans still trod its crust? What would survival mean in such a place? Villages clustered around geothermal heat, memory carried by ritual, language compressed inside firelight. Our architecture would not be stone cathedrals or cities touching clouds, but ice shelters carved and lost and carved again, temporary yet eternal through repetition. Our myths would bend toward warmth as longing, perhaps worship of an invisible summer, a paradise known only to dreams. In our very bones, in our very DNA, the memory of warmth might remain, carried forward not because it returns, but because remembrance itself becomes the hearth around which we survive. The thought deepens into metaphor. What if memory itself is a kind of warmth, something the frost cannot suffocate? Even as ice entombs rivers, even as snow buries continents, even as silence spreads outward, memory continues. Compressed like air in ice bubbles, fossilized in isotopes, written invisibly into the chemistry of soil, into the architecture of stone, into the layered archives of glaciers themselves. Every archive is a kind of fire, however faint, a record that glows when discovered. Could it be that as long as anything remembers, even silently, the frost has not truly won? And here we arrive quietly at the question with which we began. What if the frost never melted? What if glaciers held forever? What if Earth remained sealed in white eternity? The truth is we cannot know. But in imagining it, something is revealed. For when we wonder about endless frost, we are not only asking about climate, about geology, about deep time. We are asking about permanence, about loss, about ourselves. We are asking whether silence erases everything, or whether memory lingers no matter what conditions press against it. Perhaps warmth is not only sunlight, not only fire, but the act of remembering. Remembering creates space inside silence, makes it glow faintly from within. Maybe memory itself is resistance against frost, the one flame that does not extinguish. And so even if the frost never ends, even if Earth were to remain a jewel of frozen glass forever, the record of what was would endure, in the ice, in the crust, in the stars that still cast their light. Memory persisting, warmth disguised as archive. Not a thaw of the body, but a thaw of meaning. And yet, if so much can be preserved beneath silence, if even in absolute frost memory still smolders faintly as warmth in disguise, then what else, across the stretches of deep time, might inhabit the archives we have not yet opened?